Welcome to this episode of SteeleWatching, which is a podcast for Remington Steele fans. My name is Eric, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Sara, and I'm at the end of my rope. I mean, one of the hosts.
I'm at the other end of that rope, too, so I know what you're saying. Anyway, this episode is about Steele Framed, which I guess I should put kind of a early warning notice on this. I will try to be as nice and generous as I can, because I have to admit you know me too well. It's actually a good script. It's actually a good story. It's pretty well done. There's some plot holes and such, but overall it's a good episode, but I don't like it.
Oh,
it's not one of my favorites. Yeah.
This will be fun.
I've got two major problems with it. Yeah, I got two major problems. There's no humor in it. I mean, a Remington Steele episode without humor is kind of like a hot dog without chili, you know?
No, that is wrong. Chili on a hot dog? Ugh. That must be an American thing.
It's... You don't want to know what else I put on hot dogs, but yeah. Anyway.
Ketchup goes on a hot dog. That's it. That's all. Ketchup.
Anyway.
I'll occasionally allow some onions.
Yeah, it's...
Anyway. Sorry.
But no, I mean, there's no humor in it. It's not a fun episode in that same Remington Steele vein. It's a very straightforward, I'll say drama / action type story. And then my other problem with it is that I am not a fan of the super villain, because it's too comic bookish to me. I mean, in the sense that we're going to put the hero in peril. They're going to be in danger of losing their life or losing their something or other, whatever it is. We all know that's not going to happen. Otherwise there would be no show. So yeah, I'm just not a big fan of these episodes, but having said that, as I said, I will try to be objective.
Essentially what you've just said is that you're the bad cop and I'm the good cop.
Okay. All right. I'll go with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, Steele Framed first aired on October 18th, 1983, was written by Brian Allen Lane and directed by Sheldon Larry. There are two plot synopses that I liked. I'd kind of like to mix and match them, but anyway, I'm going to go with a short version of the original production synopsis, which was actually much longer, but I'm going with the one-line overall synopsis. And that is, Steele is horrified when he hits a pedestrian with his car, and the apparently fatal accident begins to look like premeditated murder. And then the TV guide listing, which is also decent. Speeding to a rendezvous, Remington hits a man. An accident? The evidence tells Laura that Remington was being blackmailed by the victim. I think that one gives a little bit too much, but there's things about it I like. So,
yeah.
And apparently, this episode was originally titled Hellbent for Steele.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't like it.
I'm glad they changed the title. Because that one just doesn't work for me.
No.
So, anyway.
It sounds like a Fast and the Furious movie.
Well, I don't keep up on those, so I don't know. I'll have to trust your judgment on that.
They're pretty bonkers. I like them.
Well, the episode begins at night. There are cars driving through a tunnel, and we see a curly-haired man with a large mustache walking along the sidewalk within the tunnel. He approaches a payphone, inserts a coin, dials a number for directory assistance, and he asks for the phone number for the Remington Steele investigations. Okay, right off, I got a problem.
Is it the same one that I have? I'm curious.
Might be.
Okay.
Generally, you didn't have to insert a coin to dial directory assistance.
Okay, that definitely wasn't the same issue.
So
right, cool.
So good. We're hitting different things. That's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. As far as I recall, and granted, it's been a long time, and my memory is not what it never was. I don't recall. I don't recall ever having to pay for a call to directory assistance. It was always a free call.
Okay.
Now you had to pay for the call afterwards, obviously, once you got the phone number. But yeah, you didn't have to.
Yeah.
So that was my issue. What was yours already?
I think I'm going to wait on mine because it becomes more readily apparent. Like the criticism I have could be explained away in this one particular moment, but it shows up again and it kind of irritates me. So I'll point it out when we get to it, but it's here as well. But the one thing that I will say, one thing that I don't know if you used to do this, but in order to avoid having to pay for a call, you'd have like somebody call you collect, but then they'd give you the message where it asks for your name. And then you just decline the charges. So like when I went to Scotland, my mom asked me the first time, I was like 24, and she asked me to call collect and just say like, when it asks you to say like your name so that it can say you have a collect call from, and then you give the name, right? I just said, I'm here and I'm fine. And so then she could just be like, okay, cool. And then like, but there used to be a bunch of commercials like encouraging people to do this. And one of the commercials I remember, well, not encouraging people to do this, like encouraging people to sign up for Bell or whatever, because this is what you do otherwise if you can't afford the call. And I remember the one ad going, you've got a call from Bob. We had a baby. It's a boy. And like, you know, do you want to accept the charges? So when you just said that, you know, you have to pay for the call afterwards, I'm thinking, not always. Sometimes you can get away with it.
Well, also, if you're Steve Jobs or
it's...
Steve Wozniak, you build this little box that just bypasses the phone company system entirely, and you just get free phone calls anywhere. So
yes, that is true. Anyway, that wasn't my issue, and we'll wait until we get to mine. But
I got a sneaking suspicion, based on what you just said about your issue, that it's an issue I have made note of later as well. So we'll see. We'll compare notes when we get there.
Yeah, we'll see when we get there.
Yeah. Anyway, so after that scene, it jumps to the agency, and we see Laura opening a bottle of champagne. Steele is holding a couple of very impractically tall champagne glasses, which Laura fills.
Flutes. They're called flutes.
Yes, I know. But to me, the word impractical comes to mind. But anyway, Steele comments that it's an excellent year. And of course, he's referring to the champagne, but Laura thinks that he's referring to it being the anniversary of his appearance in her life. And she is lightly flirting and teasing. And she's apparently told Steele that she has a surprise for him. And now she tells him that he will find it stimulating. Maybe even a whole new experience.
Survey
which,
says
course,
this was a lie.
Well, not necessarily a lie, just kind of not how it was made out to be. So
no.
She says, let's just go get Mildred, which of course deflates Steele's balloon, among other things.
Well, that's one way. That's one word for it. That's one way to put it. Yeah. Deflate something. All right.
Anyway, so they're out in the reception area where Mildred is just gushing over a shiny new computer, and she spills the beans as to the surprise. A computer glass. And she also comments that with just a little instructions, she is sure she can clear up Mr. Steele's checking account problem, which surprises him. He didn't realize there was a problem with his checking account. But
does he do his own banking, or does he just trust someone else to do it? This is what I'd like to know.
Well,
like, how do you not notice there's a problem with your checking account? And then your secretary does.
I have known of one person who apparently for much of their adult life, or at least a portion of their adult life, didn't even bother to keep track of their checking account because they had so much money in their account that they didn't have to worry about it. So
that'd be a nice problem to have.
Yeah, it would be. It would be a very nice problem to have. But
yeah,
it's possible that that's his situation. Or it could be that, as you say, he just has somebody else take care of it for him. Mildred, I mean, that's Isn't that what a secretary is for? To take care of your personal checking account?
Yeah, right. I have a couple of questions about this scene, actually. One, going back to Laura and her flirting, like she had to know that this is how he was going to take it, right? Like she had to know that what she was saying was implying one thing. So was this deliberately a bait and switch? Because it seems kind of cruel to...
That's what it seemed like to me, yeah.
Yeah. It's like I never liked this part of the episode because he didn't even remember it was a year's anniversary since he had shown up. So why make this big deal out of it and then be like, by the way, we're going to computer class? That's like saying, hey, we're going to go on this romantic date in math class. We're going to learn some, like, there's nothing exciting. I'm sorry to the computer nerds out there, but there is literally nothing. Like, this guy thought he was having a special evening. He thought this was going to be a romantic evening, and then she turns around and she's like, I'm going to go get Mildred. I don't know. That part just seems kind of unnecessarily cruel.
It definitely seemed like she knew exactly what she was doing and exactly what she was saying and exactly what he would think based on what she said. So I agree.
Kind of mean.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm wondering, and maybe you can tell me, because again, as I like to remind our listeners, I was an infant.
We all were at some point.
Well, yeah. I was an infant, though, in 1983. I was like a year old. The Mildred gushing about the computer, right? She says if she had this rig at the IRS, the revenues she could have generated, which I got to ask if she's got anything else in her life, because she seems to get way too much joy out of that. But she goes on to rave about the RAM and ROM capacity and says that, like, she spits out a bunch of numbers. I think at one point she calls it a 10021J, and I think that's what she did in the first episode that she showed up in too. We probably already covered this, but that's not a real, like, version of a computer, right? Like, do we know what this is?
I was trying to figure that out.
That was it. Vaguely, I was wondering.
It vaguely resembles a Radio Shack computer, TRS-80 would be my guess, but it's not quite the same. One of the things about this era of computers is that for personal computers, small business computers, IBM was the king, and they had the IBM compatibles, and there were a lot of other companies that were making IBM compatible computers because IBM had released the technical specs on how to build these things so other people could build them to try and promote the business. So you had all of those computers that were running either MS-DOS, which was a Microsoft DOS, or
I remember that.
DR-DOS, which is Digital Research DOS, which was a clone and is actually better than Microsoft's DOS, which is, well, I won't get into that story. But anyway, or there was CP/M, another operating system that could run on these machines. And then there were other brands and types of computers that vaguely resembled the IBM compatible systems, but were totally different. So it's hard to say what this computer is without better shots of it. My guess is that it's a early, like a Radio Shack or an IBM, but I don't know.
So one of these, like, other types of computers that I remember, and you won't know about this because this was built specifically for Ontario schools, but you're going to get a kick out of the name for it. So it was called the Icon, which that's not the part you'll get a kick out of. But so there was a bunch of different, like, CMC, Corp Icon, Burroughs Icon, Unisys Icon. It was nicknamed the Bionic Beaver. Can't make that up. That was the nickname. It was a networked personal computer built specifically for use in schools to fill a standard created by the Ontario Ministry of Education. It was based on the Intel 8186 CPU and ran an early version of QNX, which I'm reading this off of Wikipedia. I don't know what this means, by the way. A Unix-like operating system. It was packaged as an all-in-one machine similar to the Commodore PET and included a trackball mouse, like, built into the keyboard. And I remember this being, like, the standard in schools. It was used in the mid to late 80s, disappeared after the introduction of PCs with Apple and some of the other, like, I mean, when IBM became the standard. But
Mm-hmm.
this is what I recall from school, right? Is the little built-in trackball mouse and the bionic beaver. So I was trying to figure out, I'm sorry, that's what they called it. I was trying to figure out what this one was because it was not an icon, and it didn't look like a Commodore.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that computer, but the overall design of it that you describe is something that I've probably seen in the past. So.
It was pretty cool. Like it was a neat little computer system.
Mm-hmm.
I remember dying of dysentery a lot playing Oregon Trail. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, back into the episode. As I said, Laura is surprised to find out there's a problem with his checking account. Mildred assures him it's probably just a glitch. Steele is not excited by either the computer or the prospect of spending an evening learning about them, so he makes excuses. And Laura says that Fred's taking her and Mildred to the class in the limo, but he's welcome to use her car.
I'm kind of surprised this worked at all. Like, I'm sort of surprised she was just like, oh, you don't want to come? Cool, here's my car. Mm-hmm. That seemed a little... It almost seemed like she fully expected him not to come.
Which I think is actually... I thought of that when we were talking about this earlier, but I didn't mention it.
Yeah.
I think that might be part of the reason why she approached him the way she did, was to try and entice him and get him all excited and then say, oh, we're going to have computer class.
That would
and it's
have
like
the exact
the
opposite
effect. Well,
effect.
Yeah,
yes.
You would think so, but you never know. You never know.
I don't know. I'm not a guy, but I can imagine if you're expecting one thing, a romantic night, shall we say, for family show purposes, and instead get computer class. That seems like there's always a Buffy line connected to anything that I can think of, and in this case, it's Xander saying, "Oh yay, a bonus day of class plus Cordelia, mixing a little rectal surgery, and it's my best day ever." So this kind of feels like where he's at the moment.
Well, of course, it could always be, well, if you come take this class, we'll do something afterwards. And so maybe that was somewhere in there. We don't know.
Well, she didn't say it, though.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a weak point. So we'll just admit that that's a problematic and go on from there.
Yeah.
Now, curiously enough, at this point, there is a page missing from the copy of the script that I have. I don't know if everybody else's is the same way, but yeah, I'm missing a page because what happens next is that there's this phone call that Steele gets while he's in the office alone. And the person on the other line says, "My name is Henry Spellman. You don't know me, and I don't have time to explain, but I must see you." And then there is the line, "Please, there's no time. I'm in danger." And I'm thinking there was a response from Steele in there that got cut out at some point, but not having the page of that script, I don't know, because "Please, there's no time. I'm in danger." That sounds like a response to some excuse or request for more information. So.
And some of this, I'm wondering does this actor work for you as Dacoin?
You mean overall or in this particular scene?
I don't know, because there's other scenes where I guess overall, because I think for me, it's very mixed. There are scenes where he does a really good job, and other scenes where I feel like this in particular, if we're to assume that this were a real person that was really in trouble, I would not believe them. It sounds very, "Please, I'm in danger. I need your help. Come and save me." Like, it doesn't sound believable, I guess. It sounds very wooden.
Yeah. As if somebody's reading a script very badly.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly how it feels to me. So I don't know. This part doesn't work.
Yeah, there's several spots in here where I don't think it works quite as well as it could. I did not think to connect it to possibly being the actor.
Yeah, because with what you said, I don't particularly mind a supervillain. I watch, superhero shows. I don't, and I get that this is not the kind of show that we see those sorts of characters in, and it was not serialized, so we didn't typically see villains return, although we do see one other villain return, the Dancer, Prancer, Donner, and Steele, and then Santa Claus is Coming to Steele. It's the same villain, but like we don't usually see the same bad guys come back.
Right.
And generally they're not some sort of genius mastermind Moriarty type figure. So this is the first time the show tried something like that. And overall, I don't mind it. I think it actually is very clever in a lot of ways, but there's some other stuff that just kind of, I think my issues are going to, when we get there, are going to stem partly from the actor himself, because the actual construction of how he's framed Steele, I think is really, really smart. And I think it's a really good episode to test Laura's trust in him, and especially being a year past their, quote, anniversary, it's a really good episode to kind of throw a monkey wrench into things and say, all right, but how much do you really believe this guy? Because now it looks like he's really, really setting you up.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think the script is pretty good overall. I think it's well done overall for what it is. It's just I've never liked the idea of the false danger, which is what I consider supervillain episodes to basically be centered around. It's the same with Bones. You had Pallant, and you had another character. In Rizzoli and Isles, you had a supervillain. So the premise of those episodes is always the hero's in danger. Are they going to live? Are they going to, are they going to wind up? Is this thing going to happen to them? And it's not. I mean, even if it does happen temporarily, it's not long-term. It's not a permanent thing, because otherwise we'd have no show. So to me, it's always, like I said, felt comic book-like. And that's one of the things I didn't like about this episode, but I didn't think about the fact that maybe it's tied to the actor. Because, like you say, there are spots where it works well, spots that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And how do you decide whether it's the actor, the script, the directing?
It's really hard.
Or whatever.
It is. Yeah, it's really hard, because I think what you're saying kind of happens, that false drama has happened in other episodes, but we've bought into it because it's like, if we think of Red Holt Steele, for example, they blew up her house, and they came after RJ's family, and we know that they're going to defeat the bad guys and get them put in jail. We know that Laura's not going to actually get killed, but the drama worked because, not even because the bad guys were particularly good, they were just sort of faceless bureaucrats, but because there was something in the episode that kept it propelling it forward dramatically. And it may just be in this case that the actor is not a very good mastermind. He's not particularly compelling. And so therefore maybe we're not as moved.
I think the comparison to Red Holt Steele maybe highlights one of the differences that I am talking about. In Red Holt Steele, yes, there was this false threat to Laura's life. But in the process, she lost her house. Her house was blown up.
Yeah.
It was a failed attempt on her life. But there was all these other consequences that were permanent. We didn't lose our character. The character wasn't destroyed in some other way, emotionally, psychologically, or whatever, in terms of being no longer a viable character. But there was severe damage to the character's life in the process. In this one, the only real threat of danger is to Remington Steele's freedom. He's being framed for a crime.
And her career, because she does say, like, this could undo everything I've worked for. Right.
But none of that is really directly threatened in the same way that Red Holt Steele was. There's not, those are all incidental threats to the main threat being to frame Steele for a murder he didn't commit. So that's
right.
I see those as being maybe kind of different in that way.
Yeah. And that was maybe a bad comparison. A better one might be like the sleep clinic. My brain turned off for a second there, but when they're being held at gunpoint by the bad guy and they jump on each other, or Steele in circulation, like, we know they're not going to get shot. We know the bad guy's not going to shoot them. Their lives are not really in danger, but we buy in because it's part of the dramatic conclusion, right? So I don't know. I'm just wondering why this in particular. Like, there's not really any real stakes in a lot of these episodes, but we buy in because we're supposed to.
The difference there is, though, that that's not the entire plot and point of the episode.
Yeah,
that's not
true.
The entire crux of what's happening there. It's a conclusion situation, and yeah, we know nothing's going to happen to him, but that's just kind of an incidental result of the entire case. That's not the case.
Right. Yeah.
So,
true.
Anyway, you want to get back to the episode?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, everyone.
Got nothing better to do. No, it's okay. Yeah. It's just that, boy, we're going down more tangents on this one than I think we have in a long time. Anyway, so Spellman called, tells Steele he needs to meet him, tells him to meet him at the Covington Inn. And so before Steele can ask any questions, he hangs up, and then we see him put on a white cap, which is kind of funny. But Steele rushes off. We see him driving, and of course it's dark. It's been raining. We see Steele approaching the tunnel that we saw earlier, and he seems to take note of something up ahead. We can see that in his face as he's driving. He kind of gives it that funny look. What's that look? But he doesn't seem to be able to discern what it is. Suddenly, a man is standing directly in front of the car, too close to avoid, too close to even slow down before hitting him. My question is, how did Gascoigne get a dead man to stand up right at the exact right moment?
And the thing is, it would have worked just as well to have him laying on the road and have Steele, like, if you're going to hit a human body and run over it, you're going to feel that. You're going to stop. Because he probably, if it were me and I ran over something like that, I maybe wouldn't necessarily think, oh, I've hit a person, but I might think, oh shoot, I've hit a dog or an animal, and I'd stop and get out to see if it was okay. So there was not really any need to have him stand up, I guess, except for the audience's visual.
Well, the other thing is, though, that if there was something on the road like that, let's say an animal, a human, whatever, you would even in the dark, even in the rain, you would probably see something there enough to avoid it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the magic of editing. Oh, look, we can edit so that suddenly this man appears, and that's what it seems like in this case. I would have liked to have seen them come up with a better explanation and situation to explain how Steele wound up in this mess.
Because we also have to kind of suspend disbelief on, I know Laura's car gets a little bit damaged, but you hit a deer, and that can be deadly depending on how you hit it and how fast you're going. So, we kind of have to hand wave that a little bit, because if it was a human being, dead or alive, that you're running over at top speed, you might end up going over the cliff too. Like, that could permanently end Gascoigne's little plan right there. So
yeah, and it would definitely do some significant damage to the car. And when we see the car in some later shots here,
fine. It looks fine.
Oh yes, it does. It looks very good. So
those rabbits, man, they can take a beating.
Yeah.
That's a good ad for the Volkswagen Rabbit of that year.
There you go. Well, okay.
Can survive even running over wait, no, I don't think we want to do this ad. Never mind.
Well, I don't know if you remember. You wouldn't remember. You weren't born yet.
I was a baby.
Volkswagen used to do some ads with the Beetle, showing it floating in water.
Because of Herbie, probably, right?
No, because the Volkswagen. Well, I mean, I suppose that might have inspired somebody to do the ad, but it wasn't tied directly to the movie. But the whole idea was that should the worst thing happen, the Volkswagen will float long enough for you to get out of it. So.
Oh. How often does something like that happen that you need to swim for your life is what I'm wondering.
Apparently more often than we think.
It's like how when we were kids, we kept thinking we were going to step into quicksand or need to stop, drop, and roll.
Anyway, so the impact of the car on the man in the road throws him up onto the windshield of the car. Steele jumps out, rushes to the man who is now lying in the road beside the car, and initially, it appears to be the man who had called Steele, desperate for help. And as Steele's laying there or kneeling there beside the man, trying with uncertain desperation to help, we hear the sound of music from an ice cream truck. The ice cream truck pulls up and stops, and a man, presumably the man we saw earlier, who bears a striking resemblance to the victim, climbs out of the truck and approaches. Steele notices and yells at him, "There's been an accident. Man's hurt. Get a phone. Get an ambulance, please." And the ice cream man just kind of smiles and walks away.
Yeah, that's not creepy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, come on.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting that Steele, well, I guess it's understandable. Steele didn't notice the resemblance of the two men. But
well, and it's also interesting to me that the major automatically assumed that Steele would stick around. Like, I'm not saying it would be normal to flee the scene after you've hit somebody, but some people would, right?
Yes, that's true.
And
that's true.
Descoings doesn't really know Steele in the sense of he doesn't know him at all. He blames Laura technically for what happened to him and getting in prison, etc. So it's interesting that he's banking on Steele sticking around and not hopping in his car and booting it, because theoretically that imaginary person that doesn't really exist could do that too.
Well, I'm going to presume that he has read up on Steele, both the current incarnation and the previous incarnation that didn't actually have a person attached to it, and that he read things about Steele being a man of honor and honest and all the wonderful good things that Laura had created about the character. And so he was probably assuming certain things about Steele's character.
Right.
And so he probably figured he had a good bet that Steele would stick around and try and get some help. So, but
True.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's entirely possible that somebody else would have just up and said, "Nobody saw."
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I can just drive away, and I wouldn't do that. Nobody think I would do that, please. I'm just saying that some might.
So next we see a jump in time. The police, the medical personnel, reporters have all descended on the scene. Steele is leaning against one of the police cars when Laura arrives, saying she got a message during her class. She asks if he's all right, which is kind of a ridiculous question because clearly he's not all right.
But it's one that we all ask when stuff happens. Like
that's true.
You have a death in the family and people will be like, "How are you feeling?" And the answer is like, "How do you think? I just lost my, insert partner, husband, spouse."
Happy.
What, like, yeah, it's just one of those. It's one of those things that we as reflex ask as human beings and don't really think that it's an obvious answer. He's not doing well. Of course he's not doing well. He thinks he just killed a man.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so they exchange some words. Laura expresses confusion about the location and reminds him that you were at the office when we left. What's going on? And Steele starts to explain. But apparently he's irritated at a reporter who keeps sticking his camera in his face and snapping pictures at him. And he snaps at him. And then he tells Laura that Spellman had called, said he wanted to see Steele right away, gave an address up here somewhere. And no, he doesn't know Spellman, but he sounded desperate. And of course, Steele, supposedly being the intrepid detective, but he doesn't get to finish his thoughts before one of the police officers interrupts and informs him that we can't find that ice cream guy you said was up here. And you said you sent to call for help. And the officer says, well, it's not all that uncommon. Folks leave the scene of an accident because they don't want to get involved. which is kind of what you were saying earlier, except that in this case, it was a witness, which is also true. Witnesses don't always want to get involved. So as the officer turns to leave, Steele asks about the man. Who was he? The officer replies, his name was Henry Spellman.
Ouch.
Ooh, yeah. The guy he was supposed to meet. And so back at the apartment, Laura's trying to take his mind off of it with small talk. But that's what Steele's focused on is, I was supposed to meet the man. He was desperate, and I wind up killing him. And yeah, he's not doing well. He says that
I can't think anybody would be, right? Like this is something that would. I know that the lack of comedy does somewhat hinder this episode, but I think that this is one of Brosnan's best dramatic performances so far, because even when he's trying to resuscitate Spellman, the panic is not, it's not overdone, but it's palpable. He's scared. And when he makes the comment about me being the intrepid detective, you can hear the bitterness in his voice, because he thought that he could help someone, and it turned out wrong. And then again, when they come in and he says, I've never killed a man before, I don't think I care for the feeling, that's got to weigh heavily on you as a person. And I think Brosnan does a really good job here. Yeah.
And like I said, it's a well done episode, and I agree, he does a good job of acting throughout the whole thing, because there's these wild vacillations of emotion throughout the episode. So he says, I was supposed to meet the guy, and here I end up killing him. Laura kind of suggests that, I don't think she was intending to suggest this, but it kind of comes off that way, that maybe, because she says, well, maybe he was running from someone or something, which kind of implies that maybe Spellman wasn't paying attention and he walked out in front of the car. It might be as much his fault as Steele's, or maybe even more so, which I understand her comment, but yeah, it doesn't go over well. Because
I think she's trying to alleviate some of his guilt, but I think you're right. It wouldn't matter either. How it happened would not matter. The fact that it happened,
right,
would be the only thing on my mind.
That's kind of that's kind of what I was trying to say, but doing a really bad job of saying.
No, you were doing a good job of it, because I caught on. I got it. But then at the same time, what can you say?
Yeah.
What? How do you make somebody feel better for that? To me, it seems like there's not really anything that you can say that's going to help. And I think this is where maybe Steele, because if you think about it, this is Red Holt, but roles are reversed in the sense that Steele is in a crisis. He's having a crisis. He's emotionally very vulnerable. And when in Laura's case, when she had just lost her house and Steele didn't know what to say, he didn't try to offer false platitudes. He told her a story that kind of had a message or a lesson, I guess, in it, but it wasn't him floundering around for, maybe. Well,
actually, though, that was later. At the time of the explosion, the next morning,
he screws up bad there.
Well, what would be kind of the analog of this scene here?
Yeah.
The next morning, they're at the house. They're sifting through. He doesn't say anything.
No, you're right, and you can tell.
And that's really, I think, it's a terrible thing to say, but maybe sometimes that's the best thing to say, is nothing.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Just be there.
And Laura, I think, doesn't really, I guess that's what I was trying to get with it, is that she's not really as good at reading the room in that sense. I think he's socially more adept, and she's more adept at finding clues and solving a puzzle. And emotions are not a puzzle to be solved. They're in-depth and complex and hard, right? So, and I'm not saying Laura's bad at it, but I think that he's better at reading the room sometimes than she is. And she was just searching for a way to help. It just didn't maybe come out.
She just picked the wrong way, maybe.
Yeah.
or put it badly. But anyway, so she's done that. Steele says he's never killed a man. He doesn't like the way it makes him feel, as you said earlier. And Laura offers to stay the night and then clarifies that she was the Dusk Till Dawn Pinochle champion 3 years running at summer camp. Was she truly thinking that they just might play Pinochle all night or until he was calmed enough to fall asleep? Or was she maybe offering him more of a personal sort of consolation? The kind of the reverse of what happened in Red Hold Steel, only this time, instead of him saying, if you wanted, it's her saying, well, if you want, kind of a half role reversal, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I definitely saw a role reversal here. I don't know if she's offering the same thing that she mentioned to him after he gives his story. I don't know if it was necessary. I do think she was offering her company and that she was offering to be there for him and in whatever emotional capacity he needed. Obviously she wasn't, I don't think, seriously suggesting they play cards all night, if that's what Pinochle is, I'm assuming. But yes. I've never played. I don't know. It sounds like pineapple to me. So
I've never played it. I know it's a card game. I've never played it.
Okay. But I do think it's interesting that he turns her down. This is the part that really kind of clicks for me in how different they both are. Because when she lost her home, he was there and she, granted she didn't have anywhere else to go, so she had to stay with him. She didn't have a choice, but she could have found a hotel, as we talked about before. She could have stayed with Mildred. So there was some element of choice there, but she offers to stay with him and he turns her away. He says he'll be fine. And that tells me that he's maybe still not as emotionally open yet as he could be, because he doesn't want that support. He says, I'll be fine. Just go home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wasn't really thinking seriously that she was offering something more than Pinochle, but it's just something at least you have to discuss the possibility in order to eliminate it from consideration. So,
it's one of those things where a good fan fiction could justify it, right?
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Now I have an idea. Like a well-written fanfic could totally justify it going that way, but I don't think that was the immediate offer on the table. If anyone wants to write it, just send it to me or Eric, one of us.
Well, after she offered to stay and he turns her down, Steele's reply is that it's a good thing that she had invented him, because if it were the other way around, he didn't think he could dream up anyone quite like her.
Aww.
And obviously, he's meaning this as a compliment, but it seems like more. It's like one of those corny lines from a rom-com that we all no one would say in real life, but somehow we wish we could say it and pull
without
it off.
It sounding really bad.
Yeah, and we love the line because it's corny and
no, I agree.
Not 100%. Like real life, and it's but
like if one of us said it in real life, it would sound like Anakin saying, "I don't like sand. It's coarse and gets through my fingers." It would kind of come off that way. But there's a Star Wars reference in there. But you're right. I think the sentiment behind it is him saying that she's even though he's turning down her offer of support, he could not imagine anybody as it's a very, very sweet thing to say. That he could not have dreamed up someone like her. And I think it kind of hints at the fact that he's never had anybody to rely on, which is why he tells her to go home. He's used to dealing with things on his own way. Himself. Yeah. But it's sweet.
After she leaves, he's alone with his thoughts, which is probably not a good thing at the moment.
No, Laura should have insisted. She should have stayed.
Well, yeah. Yeah, but he insisted, that's what I need. Just go on, get out. And of course, as he's turning out the lights and getting ready to turn into bed, the phone rings. He answers it, and the caller identifies themselves as Julia Spellman, Henry's wife.
Okay.
Of course.
Here's my issue. We're here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Why is he in costume when no one but the audience can see it? What is the point?
That was one of my questions.
Because
yes.
he has the fake sideburns and puts the hat on in the first scene where he calls him as well. And that's an easy thing to do. You didn't need to be in costume when you make that call either. But here he's in full drag, which suggests to me that either he's a real big fan or a method actor. I'm not entirely sure which one's which, but it's not necessary.
That's what I've got written. I said, is he a method actor? No, the only explanation.
RuPaul's Drag Race.
The only explanation I could come up with in keeping within the context of the story is that, if you remember, he/she said that the police had just left after coming to talk to her about Henry.
Yeah.
So he would have been in costume and makeup and such for the police because he's presenting himself as Julia Spellman, his wife. This is going to get confusing fast. Anyway, so he was in makeup, he was in drag while talking to the police. So that's why he was, but yeah, why didn't he take it off before making the phone call? I guess the only thing is that, okay, they just left. I'm going to make the phone call. Just in case they come back, I'm going to stay in costume.
I thought wow, okay, so you've just made me think about that because I thought him saying that the police just left was just a line. I didn't even think that he came into contact with the police as Julia Spellman. I just assumed
that's a possibility as well, that it was just
he
a line.
made it up.
Yeah.
But you're right. It would make more sense if that were the case, because then at least there'd be a reason to be in the dress and the makeup and the hair and the pantyhose.
Yeah, except for the fact that
full
after the
effort.
Yeah, except that after the police had left, why didn't he take it off? But yeah, that's the only explanation I could come up with.
Even if he made the call while removing the costume, that would kind of make sense, because then we the audience would put together that the police really were there, and we'd be able to see
what we see at the end of that call.
Yeah,
which is what we do see at the end of that call. But yeah, so
maybe he just really likes it. And you know what? I'm not going to judge. You do you.
My other question, and this would apply to the police being there, and this would also apply to the next morning at the morgue.
Right.
And maybe you can answer this because you've been in theater, although I don't know how much work you did with facial appliances and such.
That's a little worried.
I don't know. It's possible.
Well, you know what? My aunt used to be a makeup person for corpses. So, yeah.
Well, my question was, how well could you pull something like that off in person up close? Now, I understand how it works on stage because there's distance. I understand how it can work on camera because with the proper lighting and film and filters and other things, you can disguise imperfections and flaws so that people in the audience, whether it be on stage or on television or movies, they're not going to see these little lines and other things where the appliance is attached. But in person, could you really pull that off? Or
I think, I'm going to say yes, because as you pointed out, if you're on stage, the only reason why you've got a crap ton of makeup on the way they cake it on, when I have done some theater, is because the lights are so bright that they would wash you out if you didn't have it on.
Which is in large part the same thing on a television and movie set.
Yes, yeah. Now, when Steele goes to see her,
the person identifying as Julia Spellman.
Yes. I'm going to say her because that's who Steele is perceiving for now.
Right.
When he goes into the morgue, Dacoin is standing further back, has his hand, I said I'm going to say her, but I'm saying his, anyway, you know who I'm talking about. He has his hand sort of over his mouth, so there's a part of his face that's obscured. And every time Steele moves, and the body is in between them, so there's some distance, right? And every time Steele sort of moves to try to comfort or get closer, he moves back. So that all put together, I think would be enough to convince, especially since Steele is emotionally distraught and isn't necessarily looking for trickery. And neither is Laura, really. They're expecting to meet this woman. And honestly, if we're assuming that this is really Julia Spellman, well, I mean, she's maybe not the most attractive of women. I'm going to say Daycoin kind of makes a butt ugly woman, but those do exist in the world, I guess. So we could just kind of, I'm sorry, I'm insulting a fake woman and somehow feeling bad about it. But like,
and you should.
Not sure how that's possible, but it could just be that fake Henry Spellman married a somewhat mannish looking woman. She's robust, she's handsome, or whatever these terms are. But I definitely think that he could have pulled it off as long as he didn't get too close, which is what he makes sure he does. He keeps his distance.
Right. So if we accept the notion that the police actually did come to visit Julia Spellman the night before.
Yeah. Maybe the lights were maybe the lights were off in the room, or
yeah, the motel room was kind of dark, so I suppose that could cover it. So, all right, well, back in the morgue. No, this is still the phone call.
Yeah.
She says she doesn't blame Steele for what happened. He says, well, he told me he was in trouble. Do you think he was? And she suggests that, yeah, maybe it was. And let's talk next morning at the morgue. She's going to be there to identify the body. And Steele, again, tries to express his regrets, but she hangs up on him mid-sentence. And, of course, as this is all happening, we see him pulling off the facial appliances and the wig and everything else and revealing that it's who we will soon learn as this coin. And then we jump to the morgue next day. Laura's concerned, but Steele assures her that he's okay. And besides, Mrs. Spellman asked him to come. So even if he didn't want to come, he couldn't really refuse.
No.
And they're greeted by the coroner, who asks if they're there for Spellman. And when they affirm that they are, he asks where the accident took place. And Laura tells him, and he kind of passingly comments, shouldn't have been that cold up there.
Yeah.
Steele and Laura approach Mrs. Spellman, who is there with the sheet-covered body of Henry Spellman. He introduces himself, at which point she goes nuts.
Oh, yeah.
How dare you come here? You killed him. Henry told me all about you. I know what you've done. And, of course, Steele tries to calm her, but she won't have any of it. You'll get yours, Steele, just like Henry, just like McIntyre, you murderer. And Laura drags him out of the room, and everybody is shocked by the reaction.
And see, this is where Daycoin works. This is where it works. He's not the best guest star we've had, but it doesn't sound as forced as the phone call did.
No. And again, is it the actor? Is it the direction? Was it the structure of the writing of the lines that just created the problem? Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it works. And maybe it works because it's, how to say it? On the phone call, it's him trying to kind of underplay, and it just doesn't really come off. But here it's, well, I can cut loose a little bit. And so there's a lot more emotional underlying of the lines. And maybe that's where his skill as an actor is really more aligned to, rather than the more underplaying type things of the phone call.
Could be.
But anyway, as Laura and Steele leave, they don't notice that they have been joined by another, as of yet, unidentified young man who has overheard everything.
Jarvis!
Next, we see a brief scene at the hotel room. Actually, this I made reference to this earlier, and I was out of sequence.
Yeah, this is where
we see a little insert scene.
Makeup.
Yeah, where he's at the hotel and he's taking off his makeup and gives this evil laugh, and we realize it's actually a man in disguise. And then we jump to the office where the young man who had been unnoticed at the morgue is there, pipe in hand, examining photos on the wall of Remington Steele and the famous. Steele walks in,
people he's met.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Yes. Well, they're all photographs from after. Well, no, they're not. I was going to say they're all photos of him as Remington Steele after he showed up with these famous people. But yeah, some of them aren't. So you're right.
Yeah.
But this unidentified person is impressed and says that the best picture he ever got was him and Tommy Lasorda. And then he apologizes for being in the office. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. I assumed.
Anyway, the young man apologizes for being in the office and says that he's been such a huge fan of Remington Steele. And he introduces himself as Detective Jarvis. And as he's searching for his ID, Laura walks in and asks what they can do for him. And I think Laura's radar is flashing warning signs at this point. Not sure why she is getting them. I think there's something off about this. And so she's a little cautious. And Jarvis does his aw shucks routine, saying that, well, he can't tell them what a hoot it is to meet them both. And traffic accidents really aren't even his department. But when he saw the name on the report as it came through, he just couldn't help himself. And he hopes he didn't leave his badge in the soap dish again. And I got to say, Jimmy Jarvis strikes me as a cross between Columbo and Richie Brockelman. So I'm sure you know who Columbo is.
I had a couple of questions about this because you said Laura's radar's flashing and he's giving his Huck Finn routine. And I'm wondering how much of it is a routine because the losing of his badge, we find out later, is quite genuine. When they're in the bank, he can't find his ID. So oh shoot, did I leave it in the soap dish? That appears to be legit.
Yeah, but it's this over-gushing of...
yeah.
It's oh, wow, you're Remington Steele. It's the fanboy stuff that's
yeah,
and the if you think Columbo, and you know who Columbo is.
Yes, I know who
and
Columbo
I'm
is.
sure most people know. He's always forgetting things and can't one more question, sir. That's kind of him. And Richie Brockelman was a short-lived, I think, summer replacement for the Rockford Files one year. And he was a college kid who was a detective, and he was always playing the kid. And
right.
Nobody took him seriously because he's a kid. And to me, that's what Jimmy Jarvis is. He's a cross between Columbo with kind of the absent-mindedness and the not quite sure what he's doing, where he's going, and anything like that. With the Richie Brockelman, hey, I'm just a kid. What do I know?
I also wondered, and you'd obviously be able to answer this more than I would be, but if pretending that he's obviously Jarvis
is that a cheap shot about my age?
No. This is a cheap shot about you being an American. Like, we're going to clarify my cheap shots.
That I'll take.
Okay. But I just mean in terms of like what the consequences would be. Like, say, we know that Jarvis is there because he thinks it's a homicide now, right? Whereas before it was possibly an accident. But even if it's an accident, would he not still be charged with involuntary manslaughter or dangerous driving causing death? Would there not still be a charge there if you've hit somebody and killed them?
Assuming that it was even just a straight accident, as long as there's a death involved, the police are going to investigate it as...
I would think so.
I don't know if the term is suspicious death or not, but yeah, I mean, there's going to be an investigation because a person died. And hopefully they are objective enough that they will let the facts and the evidence determine in their minds whether it's homicide or something lesser than that. It could just wind up being an honest accident, where the driver is not charged simply due to the circumstances. I know I used to drive truck, and one of the things I heard about while I was driving, or actually I may have been inside as a driver manager and planner, was there was a driver, and I think he might have been with our company, and he was driving down the highway, and there was a car off on the side of the road up ahead, and looked like it was having some mechanical issues or whatever. And just as he approached the car, the driver stepped out in front of the truck. Nothing he could do. He hit the individual and killed him. And to the best of my knowledge, there were no charges brought. I mean, they did an investigation, but because the circumstances were such that it wasn't anything that he did through negligence or an intentional act that wound up resulting in this man's death. Mm-hmm. There were no charges because it was an accident. And so, yes, there would still be an investigation in this case. I don't know that homicide would be the ones initially doing it.
No.
The on-scene officers would do the initial investigation, and then if there were any questions, then they would probably hand it over to another department, such as homicide.
Yeah, and I also kind of find it a bit strange that the police don't come across the fact that there is no Henry Spellman sooner than this.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that they would have to search up that sort of information, that would need to be, I don't know, like, I get there's somebody posing theoretically as Henry's wife, but would you not need to find records of this person? Or I don't know, like, would you?
Yeah, you would think that somebody would do some sort of investigation as to the identity of the victim.
Sure, yeah.
Presumably they did enough. There was some sort of documentation to prove the identity of this person, because they were apparently able to find Julia Spellman, or at least that's the impression we're given, because Julia Spellman says, the police just came. So let's assume for a moment that what Julia Spellman said was a lie, that the police hadn't come there. Then, yeah, definitely there should have been some questions raised about the fact that this person may not have existed, but if he had fake ID, they may not have looked beyond just, okay, here's a driver's license, some ID in his wallet. Okay, he's a real person. I don't know. It does seem odd, though.
Yeah, well, we'll hand wave that because we're supposed to.
Yeah. So Jarvis is there, and again, Laura asks him, what's the story? And Jarvis starts asking questions. It says, well, according to the report, Spellman had called Steele, asked to meet him at Covington. Did Laura take the call? No, Mildred had already left for the evening. Steele spoke with him and left for the Covington Inn. Yes. Well, it must have slipped his mind that the Covington Inn had burned down 6 weeks earlier. Big front page headlines and all that. And then, of course, Steele's kind of, what? And Laura says, yeah, don't you remember?
Well, she didn't either, clearly. Until Jarvis said something.
She had forgotten until Jarvis mentioned it, but then it was like, oh, yeah. But I don't think that earlier at the scene, Steele had mentioned the Covington Inn. He just said an address up here. And so this may have been her first bit of information about it being specifically at the Covington Inn. But then Jarvis apologizes and says he's imposed long enough. And really from here, it's all just paperwork. And I'm just so excited to meet you. I'm never going to forget this. And then as he walks out, Laura asks him, well, if accident reports aren't your normal area, what department do you work for? And he apologizes for not having said, and he says he's in homicide. And of course, as he leaves, Laura and Steele give each other one of those Scooby-Doo looks, roll, as you say. So from the script, and he goes as Laura looks at Remington's guarded reaction with a questioning tone, both of them aware they've just witnessed a very smooth and practiced performance.
Yeah.
So back to my earlier comments about the aw shucks just being an act. I think this is also reinforces that whole idea that the persona he's giving off here as being one of those kind of fish out of waters things. Yeah, it's an act.
I wonder if some of it I wonder if he's the kind of person who is maybe prone to forgetfulness or little things like forgetting his ID, and he's using that rather than using that in his youth, because he's clearly young, right? And instead of trying to pull a 21 Jump Street where he's pretending to be a kid, pretending to be an adult, in this case he's sort of leaning into how young he looks and how forgetful he might sometimes be, and then using that to disarm the people around him and get answers from them.
Yeah.
Because it's not all an act. He forgets his
it's
ID
not all
later
an
too.
act.
When
He's
it
definitely
matters.
forgetful. He's definitely forgetful. Yeah. So anyway, Laura and Steele are walking down the hall of an old office. This is the scene we see next. And it's pretty rundown place. According to Mildred's research, Spellman had some sort of business he was running out of the offices. And after passing by several doors, they finally find one that says Spellman, Custom Hatters for Heads of Distinction. And finding the door unlocked, they enter.
Great name.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Reminds me of the Mad Hatter from the old Batman TV series. But anyway. They find the door unlocked. They go in. The room's unoccupied. They take the opportunity to nose around a bit. And
Laura
there are
finds
a number
nice
of hats.
Fedora.
I was going to say, there's hats laying around. So naturally, Laura grabs one and puts it on. And it's not scripted. So I'm wondering if that was an impromptu bit of business by Stephanie or if that was something that they came up with as part of the direction.
If so, it worked. That hat looked great on her.
Oh, yeah. And it fits within her characters, too. So
it does.
A nice bit of business there. Steele zeroes in on the desk, Laura on the filing cabinet, and each find things that disturbs them. Steele finds an appointment book which records numerous meetings between himself and Spellman, and Laura finds a file on Steele. And as they are both pondering their finds privately, the door opens, and Laura guiltily grabs the hat from her head and returns it to the top of the filing cabinet. Oh, I'm going to hang on to this file. I'm going to stick it behind my back so maybe you won't see it, but I'll get the hat off my head because, that's what you do. So she's holding the file behind her back. Steele is holding the appointment book behind his back. And an old man comes in carrying a bundle of flowers, lilies to be exact. He sort of apologizes for interrupting them, saying that he was just making some tea when he heard them arrive and tells them, carry on, and then offers Laura one of the flowers. The old man moves towards Steele, who's, like I said, hiding the appointment book behind him and asks what kind of hat he's looking for. And I call back to the premiere episode. He introduces himself as Ben Pearson.
Yep.
And then he introduces Laura as Miss Holstein. Holstein.
Or Holstein, sorry. Sounds like a cow.
Yeah. For some reason, even though I've never seen the movie, it reminds me of that line I've heard quoted so many times. Young Frankenstein. Not Frankenstein. Was it Frankenstein, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why it reminds me of that. It just does. But anyway, she's supposedly with the Mutual Fidelity Insurance Company saying that they're there about Mr. Spellman's life insurance. And they need some additional information in order to approve the final payment. And the old man seems confused. And Laura clarifies that Mr. Spellman died the previous night as a result of an accident. And the old man says, are you sure it was an accident? And was a man named Steele involved? And Laura says, well, yes, a Mr. Steele was involved. And the old man is distressed. He says he had warned Spellman not to push Steele, that there are other ways to get money like that, and something like this could happen. And when Steele and Laura press for more details, the old man clams up. He's already said too much. And the whistle of the teapot gives him an excuse he needs to leave. Steele attempts to follow the old man, but Laura stops him. And then after the old man has left, Laura and Steele leave as well, with Steele bringing the appointment book he found and Laura the file. Steele says that according to the appointment book, he has had 4 meetings with the ubiquitous Mr. Spellman in the last 2 weeks. And Laura asks the natural question. That's not possible, is it? And yeah, Steele doesn't take kindly to that question.
No.
The implied doubt. And in fact, he gives her kind of an angry look and then walks away. And
I have to say that she toes the line really well throughout this episode, because there's moments where she's clearly behaving a certain way to get as much information as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what causes Steele to wonder if she is doubting him. Because, like, for example, when they're in the office and Daycoin says, oh, a man named Steele wasn't involved, was he? And I think he expected Laura to say, no, he wasn't, to defend him. But instead, she calculatingly clocks that she'll get more information out of the situation if she's honest about it and says, yes, he was. And I mean, obviously it's Daycoin, so the information that he gives is leading them further into his plot. But either way, in Laura's mind, it wouldn't do any good to deny that he was involved, because that would maybe shut off an avenue of information.
Plus the fact that it would probably become public knowledge through the newspapers and such.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think she's just kind of trying, like, she takes that file that has Steele's information in it, but she doesn't tell him about it until later, because she's still trying to put together the pieces of what it means. I don't think it means that she's doubting him, but they're still not too sure about each other. When things get tough, that's when the cracks start to form. So in his mind, her reaction means that maybe she's doubting him, whereas I think for her, she's just genuinely trying to piece together what it means that he's in this appointment book, that these appointments were never a thing.
Yeah, but even to us in the audience, her line comes off as being somewhat disbelieving. Yeah. So, I mean, you can understand why he would respond that way, because it sounds like she's not really believing him.
Yeah, and I don't 100% love the line, to be honest. If they were trying to sow that seed of doubt, it might have been better just to have her say nothing and to sort of keep silent, because that silence could be equally as damning and wouldn't leave as much room for ambiguity.
Right.
Or would maybe leave more room for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but either way, yeah, he does not take kindly to the question, and he walks away, and then Laura, after a moment's hesitation, follows.
Yeah.
And of course, in the background, we see the old man poke his head around the corner and wait for Laura and Steele to be gone. Then he comes out of hiding and returns to the office of Henry Spellman. And back inside the office, he sits down at the desk, picks up the phone and dials a phone number. And then after a moment says he's calling for Inspector Jarvis, or Detective Jarvis.
Yeah.
And waits another moment. Jarvis apparently comes onto the line. And next we hear the old man say, "I found that appointment book of Mr. Spellman's you were asking about." And he pulls open a drawer and pulls out another appointment book exactly like the one Steele found and took with him. And he tells Jarvis, yeah, he has it right there in front of him. Mr. Steele, you say? Well, I don't know. Let's have a look, shall we? And again, as he's speaking, he begins pulling off the facial appliances, and we can see that it's the same man who previously masqueraded as Julia Spellman.
Yeah.
Back in the office, Mildred is ecstatic. She has finally cracked Mr. Steele's checking account problem. But Laura's not really listening. She's looking through the file folder that she took from Spellman's office and is disturbed by what she's finding. And the item that grabs her attention immediately is a newspaper clipping from the Los Angeles Tribune that reads, "McIntyre slain." McIntyre. That's the name Mrs. Spellman mentioned. And the article has a photo of a classic Rolls-Royce car with a body lying beneath a sheet next to it. Laura puts the clipping back in the folder, closes it, and then asks Mildred what she was talking about Steele's checking account. And, of course, Mildred doesn't think it's appropriate to discuss with Laura. And Laura's frustration is starting to affect her behavior, because she fairly snaps at Mildred, saying, well, he may be the boss, but she's in charge. Remember? And, of course, Mildred reluctantly surrenders and bangs on some computer keyboard keys and says, well, see for yourself. And she comments that with all those checks to the Spellman Hat Company, you'd think you'd see our chief in a hat every once in a while, wouldn't you? Laura thanks Mildred, tells her to keep checking out those phone numbers on Spellman's bill and saying that one of them might open a door.
Poor Mildred. She doesn't know what's going on through, like, all of this episode.
No. In fact, that's what comes up. And Laura, she's been sitting cross-legged on the desk. She gets up to leave, but Mildred stops her and says, look, I know I'm new to the agency, which is kind of a tacit acknowledgement that she isn't privy to most of the workings of the agency, but she asks very apologetically if Laura would tell her what's going on. And Laura hesitates and then replies, no, not yet.
Not yet.
Inside Steele's office, we see him on the phone. He's talking to his fencing instructor, apparently, to get confirmation to prove his whereabouts on a certain date and a certain time. It's good news and bad news. The instructor remembers Steele being there that afternoon because just after he left, somebody, he thinks the name was Spellman or something like that, called to apologize for not showing up and said something about the McIntyre account.
Not good. Not good.
And of course, Steele is stunned and silent, and then he begs off. And then we see that Jarvis is at the fencing club with Steele's instructor and asks if they can talk.
I actually really like the fact that he seems to pop up in all these scenes just after, like, he's in the morgue after they leave, and he's in the background of the scene after the like. This is clever. I enjoy this cat and mouse game where we see Jarvis there, following the same leads.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now we're back into the office for an extended scene with Steele and Laura, and I want to just read my notes here as a preparatory to this scene.
Sure.
Great acting by Stephanie and Pierce, especially Stephanie,
Yes.
constantly and seamlessly moving, not just from one emotion to another, but mixing them together
Yes.
in perfect and restrained proportion. Anger and
Absolutely.
frustration, disbelief and belief, doubt and faith. It's like the perfect stew, all blended together, but each ingredient still retaining its flavor and its distinct characteristics.
Now I'm both impressed and hungry.
Yeah, I'm hungry too because I'm smelling something my wife is cooking for lunch, and the smell is just coming up here, and it's like, oh. But I mean,
no, but you're absolutely right. That's a perfect description of
because the
her.
acting in the scene is so great because there's such quick vacillation between extremes, but it's not overdone, it's not faked, it's not unbelievable, it's not forced. It's like we're seeing these two people actually having this conversation in this situation, and we're just flies on the wall.
Yeah.
So it's really well done.
And it's I liked when he says it's bad enough I kill a stranger, now I'm scratching for alibis I won't hold. Then he says, I'm actually starting to think I'm in real trouble. And Laura's response, yes, I think we are. Sit down. This is a really good this is a good segue into this scene, because the use of the word we, and this is from my notes, shows that she's thinking about the two of them as a team, whereas he's not. All he sees is the potential that he has to destroy her life with these accusations, as well as what it might do to him. Because in the past, something like this came up, he'd be gone. He'd just boot it, right? He wouldn't stick around for Jarvis to question him or to search for alibis or to he would just leave and find himself in the Mediterranean. But now his guilt or lack thereof or what have you is going to destroy her life.
And that bothers him.
Yeah,
that
it really
bothers him.
I mean, if he's found guilty, there goes the Remington. It doesn't matter if he's not real. If she has two options, she can come out and say, oh, don't worry, everybody. I made him up and this is a con man. Haha. In which case, no one's ever going to hire them again. Or he's really a murderer, in which case, no one's ever going to hire them again. It's a lose-lose for her, and he knows it. And I just really love the way he plays this fear because of what it will do to her, and that she believes him. But there's this momentary flicker of doubt where she says it seems to be Acapulco all over again. And it's not that she actually thinks he's guilty. She doesn't. She believes that he's not guilty, but she thinks it's his past. This is exactly what she talked about in that dinner scene, where there's going to be an old score. Somebody's coming to get even with you, and it's going to impact my life. And now this is it coming to pass. So I really love the intersections of those two things that they're both afraid of. Him being afraid that he's destroying her life somehow, and then her confirming that fear by saying, this is what I told you about in Acapulco. Every time I turn around, there's going to be an enemy knocking on our door looking for you. And of course, what I love about this episode is that twist at the end, that it turns out to be an old enemy knocking on her door and just not knowing.
Her Remington Steele, not his Remington Steele. Yeah, absolutely. And although he is still concerned about his well-being, but obviously, yes, he is very much concerned about her well-being, which is probably something alien to him.
Yeah.
But as you said,
because if he wasn't, he would have left here and now. He would have left before this. He would have left the minute something went wonky at the morgue, I think.
Yeah.
But now he's sticking it out because he wants to clear his name because he doesn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm. And after Laura says that line about, yes, I think we really are in trouble, and she directs him to sit down, he keeps on his rant, and she has to just sit down.
She reins him in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and then, of course, this is when she starts going over all the evidence about the phone bills. And
which looks really bad. All of it looks really bad.
I mean, he supposedly received all these phone calls, supposedly made all these phone calls. The phone company verifies it with their call records, the newspaper clipping, which shows him and McIntyre, and Steele seems to be holding a newspaper dated the day that McIntyre died. And it's, that McIntyre was involved in a jewelry theft. And this is a little bit of information that comes back. The gems were worth over $100,000, which means that sold on the street to a fancy would be worth about $50,000. And that number comes up again. So it's important to note. And of course, she goes on about how Mildred found a second checking account in his name that contains $50,000.
Yeah.
The bulk of the money being siphoned into Spellman's Hat Company. And that the interpretation that the police are going to have of this is that Steele was McIntyre's missing accomplice in the jewel theft, that he probably murdered McIntyre. Spellman somehow found out and began blackmailing him for that jewel money, that $50,000. And when his demands got too rich, Steele killed him, trying to make it look like an accident. And she takes a breath, finally, and he responds and says, "But you're not the police, are you, Laura?" And she says, "No, but exactly what you said.
Yeah.
All these things that have happened in the past, he was trying to steal the jewels that she had been hired to protect when they first met. McIntyre had been killed 10 days before that." And she's expressing all these apparent doubts. But it's like you said, she's just outlining the situation because she's still in on it. She's still in as part of the team on this. She's just saying, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But he misreads it, I guess. Because he loses it. He grabs the file folder from her hand and throws it across the room. And he's angry. He says, it doesn't matter what they say. What matters is, does Laura believe he's clean, or is Jarvis in the room as they speak? And again, Laura reiterates that as difficult as it is to believe, she does believe he's clean, but that doesn't change the facts.
This is, I think, a really good example of how different they are, because in this particular instance, you've got two very different reactions, right? You've got her reaction of, I need to focus on the facts. I need to get all the facts. I need to know. And also I need to know where the police are at, what they're thinking. So she's thinking like the police, even though she believes he's innocent, she's laying it out and she even says that to him, only what Detective Jarvis will tell you if he hasn't already gotten this far. So to him, this looks like she doesn't believe me. That's why he gets so mad. That's why he throws the file folder across the room, because in his mind, if she trusts him, none of these facts should matter. And in her mind, these facts are all that matter, because they're what's going, unless they can figure out a way around them, it doesn't matter what she believes. So it's kind of interesting that for him, he needs that emotional reassurance. And for her, she needs that hard data to counter what she's found, because otherwise it won't matter whether it's true or it's not true. It's still going to destroy them. So I really love this interaction, because he just needs reassurance from her, and she gives it. She says, I believe you, but it's not gonna matter if we don't figure out what's happening here.
Yeah, what we believe doesn't matter. It's what we can prove.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
What somebody else can prove. And so, and it's interesting because he's been angry. That's why he grabbed the file folder and threw it, because he doesn't believe that, or he thinks that she isn't really believing him. And then he goes from angry to desperate and says, what's happening is I'm being framed like a $2 watercolor. That's what's happening.
You know, so I like it.
So he's
panicking.
You know, again, yeah, but again, the acting here, he goes from
it's great. It's great.
Angry to desperate so smoothly.
Yeah. And so
it's desperation tinged with that anger and frustration, and it's just great. Yeah, it's great.
And then she launches into it's Acapulco all over again, which
exactly
in her, like, it looks that way. Somebody's coming after him. Somebody's trying to settle an old score through him, and this is exactly what she was afraid of happening. It's going to come back on her.
Yeah, and he says, look, yeah, I've put a few noses out of joint in my time, and stepped on a few toes and made some enemies, but he says he can't think of anyone who he's crossed so badly that they would go through all of this just to put his head on a platter. And then Laura kind of puts the final nail in the coffin, saying, well, you'd better go back and look again, because as good as we are, until we find out who's after you, she says they don't stand the proverbial snowball's chance in hell of beating it. And
I love that it never occurs to her that this might be a case she worked, because it shouldn't. There's literally, this is one of those things where we have enough evidence from Steele and his former life to fully believe as the audience. When I first saw this is what the twist is. A twist. It's a good twist. It's a twist that we as the audience are not supposed to see coming, and it makes sense that she doesn't think, well, maybe this is somebody I crossed, because she's never had this happen to her before. I'm sure. No. Yeah. So it's good. It's really good. And Mildred coming in right at that moment is great too.
Well, and she thinks she's got good news.
I know.
She thinks she's found a safe deposit box in Spellman's name at Palmer Bank, and she's seeking some sort of recognition and approval for her words. Lead. And she's, isn't it?
Because she's just walked in on mom and dad fighting, right? This is the child walking into the room during a really emotional moment and going, look, I painted a picture, mommy. And like the two adults looking at the child going like, what's going on here? This is it's a good way to break the tension too. Right. Yeah. It's a good moment of tension breaking.
But she doesn't get anything. It's just like deadpan.
Yeah. It's great.
So in the next scene, we see that Laura and Remington are not quite literally, but very closely dragging a protesting Mildred into a bank against her will. And she's pleading and begging, it's illegal, unprofessional, and I refuse to be a party to it. I don't work for the IRS anymore.
Ethics?
And impersonating an agent, we could go to jail for this.
We may go to jail anyway, Mildred. But this is the comedy that you were missing. This is it. It's here.
Okay. It is. It's a little bit.
The scene is funny. It's good.
Yeah. But as soon as they arrive at the desk, bam,
it's like
it's a flip of a switch.
Flicked.
It's tough guy Mildred shows up again. Whips out the ID. It has to be fake, created by Steele or somebody he knows, I'm sure. Tells the woman, Mildred Krebs, IRS, I got to pick up that Spellman box and have it in court in an hour. So stow the chatter, shred the red tape, and cough up the keys, dearie. It's a great line.
It's great. It's great. Like, I would cower before the bureaucracy that is Mildred Krebs in this moment. Yes. She's good.
And when the woman says, well, what? And Mildred says, you've been expecting this for over a month. Don't play the bureaucrat with me, honey. I invented the word. It's great.
And then here's my question. When she pulls out this forged court order on her own letterhead, this is one of those moments where I thought this would be so much harder to do now. You couldn't do this scene now because obviously she made that court order, at least not the same way you couldn't do it. She clearly made that forged court order on her brand new 1021J. Though, with all the RAM and ROM, she obviously used that to make this court order. But like, if you were to do this now, you'd need to somehow hack into the court system and create a fake court order.
No.
No.
You know what you need? A laser printer. That's all.
Okay. Wow.
Because
okay.
see, all those things are just printed out on a laser printer. There's nothing special about those documents in the sense that there's no special encoder, decoder that you run it through and it does anything. All it is it's printed on a laser printer. So anybody with a laser printer could pull it off. All they would need to do is they would need to know what the IRS letterhead looks like, a normal letter or a normal court order that the IRS would get to access something like this, that it's a safe deposit box, and just recreate it on a computer. That's how they were created in the first place.
That's funny. Because I would assume that these things would need to be digital. They'd be
Nowadays, they might do a digital version, an electronic version.
Right.
But
I guess you can forge that too. You're right.
Yeah, but the person at the bank who's actually going to be sitting there at the desk doing that probably wouldn't get the digital version of it. Now, the bank manager, somebody like that might, and having gotten that, they would tell them. But I don't believe, and I'm not a lawyer, but I don't believe that something sent electronically is necessarily going to fly in court, because everything's still done on paper. I mean, there's always paper backups in it. It's the paper, the certified copies that are sent through the mail or have the notary public stamp on them. Those are the things that actually get submitted into the court for record keeping. So there might be some more things that need to be done now than back then. But yeah, it would have been not difficult at all. Just get a laser printer.
All right. I stand corrected.
It
works. Whatever it is, it works.
Yeah, and as I was saying that, I was trying to remember, because I remember something along those lines from years and years ago, where somebody printed up some documents and basically scammed somebody because they were legal looking documents that had been printed on a printer. And in fact, for a while there, color photocopiers and color laser printers were being used by counterfeiters to print counterfeit money.
See, we that's why ours is like literally plastic now in different colors and has all the little things in it that you can't. Ours is really hard to counterfeit.
Well, I'm not sure that these counterfeits that were printed on printers, color laser printers, and made on color copiers, I don't think they would stand up to close scrutiny, but they were the kind of thing that the average person might not pay attention to and would accept and allow to pass. And I think that's another reason why our money has changed over the last couple dozen years. So, yeah. But anyway, back into the episode. The woman finally gives them the keys. They go inside the vault, and inside the vault, Mildred is clinging to the security gate, saying that now she knows how Bonnie Parker must have felt and that it's safe to assume that they'll get 15 years. But if they cop a plea, they might get minimum security. And the shot is really nicely framed. And it's a clever use of the set dressing, because she's holding onto that security screen and she's behind it as if she's holding on to prison bars. And it really does a nice job of reinforcing the dialogue. And it's not in the script. It's not in the script that way. The script just simply says, the camera pulls back to reveal Remington and Laura over the box, Mildred in the background, cringing somewhat, her eyes turned away as she can't bear to look. So this is something that was either done in a later revision of the script or was done on set as Sheldon Larry, as the director. He probably said, okay, I've got this great idea. Put this screen over there. She'll be hanging onto it like she's behind prison bars. Yeah. It's a great shot. It's a great tie-in with the dialogue. So credit to Sheldon Larry or whoever came up with that idea. Well done.
It's good. It's quite funny.
Yeah. Well, they pulled out the safe deposit box. Laura and Steele look inside and they find a curiously familiar thing. $50,000 in cash.
Mm-hmm.
That number keeps coming up. And an old coin. Steele looks at it and concludes it's probably a collector's item of some sort and asks Laura if it fits anywhere, but it doesn't seem to ring any bells for her.
Not yet, anyway.
Well, yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
But they also find a large manila envelope with a photo inside, and it's a photo. Sorry, I made reference to this earlier, and I was wrong. This is the photo of Steele and McIntyre with Steele holding the newspaper.
Right.
dated the night he was murdered. So, yeah, sorry about that. Jumped ahead, got it all wrong. But Steele insists. Great. Do I get severance pay?
Canadian. You get a pack of Timbits.
So Laura says now there is a definitive link between Steele and McIntyre, but Steele insists that the photo's faked. It's got to be because he never met him. So they decide they better leave right now. And Mildred hopefully asks if they should take the money and is immediately disappointed when Steele slams the lid shut. And as they're exiting and going back out into the main area of the bank, they spot Detective Jarvis. Steele turns to hide his face and then tells Laura and Mildred to book it, make themselves as scarce as they can. Steele cuts through the several lines of tellers, pausing along the way to snag a deposit slip from one of the patrons. And then he cuts in front of the line, scribbles a note on the deposit slip, and hands it to the teller. And the note reads, "Good afternoon. This is a stick-up. Please put all the money from your drawer into a bag. Thank you. P.S. Please ring the silent alarm."
This is the most Canadian bank robbery ever. I'd just like to say that. This is exactly how we would do it.
Well, and of course, the teller is very helpful. Don't you mean don't ring the silent alarm? And Steele gestures toward Jarvis and says, "On the contrary, that young man in the corduroy jacket standing behind me is armed and dangerous, and he's forcing me to commit this heinous crime against my will." And of course, just at that moment, Jarvis, unfortunately for him, reaches around to scratch his back and in the process pulls his jacket back and reveals his gun. And I got to say, that is got to be one of the most impractical holster placements I can imagine, because I can't even imagine how he would reach it with his right hand if he needed to grab it and hurry. I mean, it's almost, I just don't see how it would work.
It's clearly just done for the visual of having to make it visible.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll just hand wave that one. The teller sees the gun, trips the alarm, which of course notifies the security guards around the bank, and they pull their guns from eminently more practical holsters and rush toward Steele. The teller hollers, "No, not him. He's got the gun," and points to Jarvis. And of course, Jarvis ducks, as in, "What?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, anybody would, I would think.
And he calls out, "Don't shoot, I'm a cop." And Steele starts crawling out of the bank and waves at Jarvis. And the guards demand that Jarvis show them some ID if he's really a cop.
Yep.
Which he doesn't have on him. They're in his other pants. But he assures them that Steele, that guy right over there, is the one you want. He has a warrant for his arrest right here in his pocket. And Laura and Mildred are also crawling toward the door and not out yet.
Yeah.
The security guard confirms the warrant. And Steele makes it to the door and starts heading out. And as he does, a vagrant-looking, though somewhat familiar fellow walks in, passing right by Steele. It's our suspect. Laura and Mildred are almost to the door, but Jarvis gets let go by the guards in time to stop them. He runs down the list of things he's got on Laura: aiding and abetting, withholding evidence, obstruction of an officer, and warns her that if she doesn't cooperate, he'll play the full house. At which time Laura hands the envelope to Jarvis, and the vagrant shoves his way past.
Yep.
Back at the office, Laura and Jarvis are having something of a battle of wits, I think, and playing kind of a variation of the game 20 Questions. Laura asks, "How fast does a body cool down at the moment of death?" And Jarvis tries to play dumb again, and Laura calls him out on it, saying, "I thought we were already past the Huck Finn routine." And he drops the act and says, "About 5 degrees per hour, weather permitting."
And that's I would like to point out the actor here too. Like, he does a really good job of his demeanor just totally shifts. And but like, you buy it. You just buy it.
Yeah. And you buy that everything he's been doing, with the exception of the legitimately forgetful things like leaving his badge and his ID somewhere, but the whole I don't know what I'm doing act is just an act. Yeah. It's just an act. And he knows it, and he knows it works. So Laura points out that if Spellman was hit at 8:30 and the coroner received his body 4 hours after that, even figuring the temperature that night, it shouldn't have dropped below 70 degrees in the body. So how come on the autopsy report, the body temperature was listed as a full 20 degrees below that? Jarvis admits he doesn't know, but it really doesn't matter. He says that a man was murdered, and that's enough for him.
Which does not...
Shouldn't it matter?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Like a good police officer would, even if it doesn't mean that he necessarily abandons thinking that Steele is guilty, a good police officer would put that in the back of his toolkit and say, okay, that doesn't fit. That's something worth looking into.
Yeah, because that alone would call into question the time of death.
Yeah.
Now, if he was still intent on pinning it on Steele, he could try to create a scenario and find evidence that maybe Steele had committed the crime earlier in the evening, late that afternoon, and had staged the accident to throw off the apparent time of death to confuse the investigation. But it's something that has to be taken into account, because if this were to go into court, a defense attorney would have a field day with that piece of information.
A police officer, they work with the court system, with the prosecution. So they don't want to present a case full of holes, because that means that person might walk. So,
well, that's why you make up evidence to fill those holes.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
So, it seems to me that he should matter, or that should matter for him. Yeah. That it should at least be a question in his mind. Mm-hmm. But anyway, at that time, they're having this exchange. The phone rings, and Jarvis, thinking it's Steele calling, leans in close enough that he can try and overhear. But it's not Steele. It's I want to say
perfect timing. It's Abigail.
It's Abigail. Yes. And Laura, there's a very special young man I'd like you. Yeah. What is Laura's mother thinking? Here she is, a special young man I'd like you to meet over the telephone. I'm sure Jimmy would love to hear your recipe
for shrimp mousse. And I had to sound good. First of all, no, I had to look it up to see if it was a real thing, and it is.
I did too.
And it looks disgusting. Like if there was a little puke emoji, that's
mayonnaise and sour cream, and it just doesn't look good.
No. So but this is like my favorite thing ever. Like, you want to torture someone, put them on the phone with Abigail.
Yeah. But Abigail's got to be thinking that Laura is her young man. This is her new young man.
This is why it's so funny, because she's obviously, as you hear snippets of the conversation, she's clearly quizzing him when he says, "No, I have no philosophical objection to marriage," and then later on talks. It's so good. I love it. Like, she's frustrated, she's ticked off, and she's like, you know what? Here, Jimmy would love to speak with you, Mom. It solves two problems. One, she doesn't have to talk to her mother, and two, it keeps Jarvis out of her hair for a few minutes.
Which is good, because Mildred comes in saying that Laura's car has been repaired, hands her the keys, and which with attitude calls her Quisling.
Yeah.
Yes. And of course, Laura is stunned by her accusation and asks what she's talking about. Of course, Mildred goes on her mini rant. How could she betray Steele, their leader? He trained Laura, gave her this job, and this is how she shows her thanks.
Did you look up the origin of the insult?
Oh yeah. I kind of already knew. I didn't know the details, but I knew the general gist of it.
Yeah, I was. So I Wikipedia'd it because I was really curious. And the gist of it is, and I'm going to butcher his name here, but Vidkun Abraham Lauritz Johnson Quisling was a Norwegian military officer, politician, and Nazi collaborator who nominally headed the government of Norway during the country's occupation by Nazi Germany during World War I. And I didn't realize that, like, when we learn about Nazi Germany, Norway isn't really a country that comes up a lot. So I thought this was really interesting that he was posted as a diplomat initially, and then according to this, in 1933, he left the Farmers' Party and founded the fascist, and I'm going to butcher this, National Samling, or National Gathering is what it translates to. And then, of course, basically, he became kind of like a Hitler's little buddy kind of thing. Germany invaded Norway in progress. He attempted to seize power in the world's first radio broadcast coup d'etat, but failed since the Germans sought to convince the recognized Norwegian government to legitimize German occupation. And then Quisling eventually managed to become a pro-Nazi puppet with his little regime known as the Quisling regime. So it's kind of interesting just how that, to use that term against Laura, which is kind of a deep cut. And she does tell Laura he was a Nazi collaborator, but it's like Judas would have been a more recognizable insult, but she doesn't. She goes for Quisling. So
yeah,
I don't know if that was quite as recognizable in the 80s as it, but I had to, she does explain it, but I had to look it up further because I was curious.
Yeah. Yeah. So they have their little disagreement, and as this is happening, we see Steele. He drops in on a computer store, and he's getting the bum's rush from a computer salesman who keeps repeating the line that we're going to hear again later in Blood is Thicker Than Steel. I hear you.
I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
Which prompted me to go look at that episode to see if it was written by Brian Allen Lane, which it wasn't. But it's funny that line, I hear you, I hear you, comes up again. Hear you. But after the salesman finally gets to a point where he has to take a breath, Steele tells him he's looking for a computer that can phone another computer. And the salesman says, I hear you. Okay, no, he doesn't. But he says he's got just the thing for Steele, and Steele asks for a demonstration. Back in the office, Mildred is at her desk when a message comes across the screen of her computer. It reads, Laura, Steele here. I must see you. Where can we meet? Reality alert. That's not how that would work, because there's more to connecting one computer to another than just, it just pops up on the screen.
That's one of those things that they did these things on TV with computers that you could do now, but could not necessarily do then. And then, of course, science fiction becomes science fact essentially somewhere down the line. I'm not saying you couldn't do it at all, but in the way that he does it.
No, not in the way he does it, because it would have to dial into the other computer, and then the other computer would have to be pre-configured to answer that call as it comes in, or somebody would have to manually make the connection.
And it would have to be done by somebody that's better with computers than Steele.
Yeah. Well, the salesman probably set it up for him, but this is, it doesn't quite work that way. It doesn't just pop up on your screen like that. But anyway, hand wave. Mildred gets the message. She hesitates, probably unsure what to do. I mean, after all, she's just an old bureaucrat, not a spy.
Right.
But she makes up her mind and makes a decision. She gets up, turns the computer so that the screen is toward the wall, and then heads into Steele's office. Now, Laura is in there. Jarvis is still stuck on the phone with Abigail.
Talking about serious illness in his family. Oh, no. Poor guy.
All those things that you said earlier. Mildred rushes toward Laura. Obviously, she forgot that Jarvis was there, or was so focused that she didn't realize that he was still there talking on the phone. And she starts to tell Laura about the message she received, but realizes that Jarvis is still there and stops mid-sentence, leaving Laura hanging. And when Laura asks, what is it, Mildred?
I quit.
And of course, Laura's, what? You can't quit. And Mildred spins a yarn saying that if they can't supply her with a 1020J computer, which she asked for, and instead give her that
hunk of microchips
that even Einstein couldn't manage, well, then she's finished. And of course, as she's doing this, Jarvis turns away, and that gives her the opportunity to gesture, point, shove her hand out toward the office.
And Laura still doesn't clue in.
No.
This is what kills me. She doesn't figure it out.
No. Mildred finally has to just leave the office and hope that Laura follows her, which she does, trying to stop her again. And she's still saying, talking to Mildred as if she believes that Mildred really is quitting.
Okay, so here's another thing. Did you notice the man in the background?
The man in the background.
So there is, this has been driving me crazy.
The man sitting in the chair?
Sitting in the chair. Is that the major? Or is it just a client that they're ignoring because that's what they do?
No, it's a client that they're ignoring.
Okay.
I mean, why would you?
It's just such a weird.
Why would you worry about a client who's got money there to buy your services?
It's just such a weird extra to include for no reason whatsoever. They don't acknowledge him. They don't speak to him. He's never like. He might as well be part of the furniture, and it's just funny because nobody even looks at them. Like we see him, but I don't know. I thought for a minute there, and I watched it a couple times, and I thought, no, that's not the major. It's not, because if it were, we'd see him take off the disguise after, and it's usually a production. But this is just some poor dude who's apparently sitting there. I'm wondering what happened
Mr.
behind
Steele.
the scenes to like, was it the nephew of the director who wanted to get in on the show? And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll just stick you in the office and you can just pretend to be I don't know. Like, did he win a contest?
It could very well be. It could very well be.
Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Anyway, Laura, as I said, followed Mildred out, and she's still trying to convince her that the situation isn't really as bad as she's making it out to be. And Mildred turns and grabs Laura and leads her to the computer, where Laura finally realizes what's going on when she sees the message on the screen. Yes. Anyway, she begins typing a response, but not before Jarvis comes out, and he comments that it seems a funny time to be worrying about their computer. And when he reaches out to spin it around so he can see the screen, Mildred quickly turns it off. Now, Jarvis is no dummy. He realizes that it was probably some sort of message from Steele, and Laura confirms his suspicion and says, yes, Steele wants her to meet her alone.
Quisling.
Oh, Mildred just can't stand it. And she does. She calls her a quisling again. And Laura just happens to drop her coffee, or maybe it was tea, on front of Mildred's dress and her own.
Oops.
And, so sorry. And Jarvis says, keep the meeting. Laura agrees, but says, well, I need to change my dress first. And she gives Mildred a kind of a devious look as she's leaving. So hopefully Mildred's a little bit better at reading the signs than Laura is. Next, we see Jarvis and Laura in a car as they arrive at an observatory. And Laura is wearing a large red hat. Is.
Okay. That was bugging me. That was one of my questions. What is the building? Because it like I assumed it was some sort of specific landmark in LA, but given that I don't live there, it was a little confusing.
No, I looked at the buildings in the background, and it's some sort of an observatory.
Okay.
I don't know which one it is or what it is specifically, which one, if it's part of a university or whatever, but yeah. But because you can see the observatory domes on the top of the building, and you can kind of, if you look really close, you can kind of see where the doors open up to allow the viewing by the telescope.
Laura's outfit.
Yes,
you can see
it looks like a graduation gown.
Yeah, like you can see she's wearing something underneath. It's clear that this is, I don't know if, I mean, maybe Jarvis wouldn't have found it I don't know, but it's very kind of obviously put on. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, to me, it looks like a graduation gown, which should be raising all kinds of red flags. Yeah. Red being the color of the, you get it? Anyway.
More of a burgundy, but we'll call it a burgundy flag, sure.
And it's curious that Jarvis's tie kind of seems to match. Yeah. But anyway, Laura comments on their location, saying that presumably she and her friends in high school and college, used to hang around here when she was a teenager, and Jimmy Dane made it safe for all of us rebels, she says. That's our
only film reference in the movie or in the episode, which is not even direct reference.
But was she really a rebel? Maybe a little bit in college, but high school? I just can't somehow.
I'm not sure she was. I think she's just saying. I think it's just a line. I don't know. It's an odd one.
She didn't strike me as a rebel back then.
No.
Anyway, Jarvis comments that people seem to always come back to the same place sooner or later. And Laura tells Jarvis that she doesn't like what she's about to do, and then asks him to have his people give her enough of a lead to get to Steele before they do anything, because she doesn't want anybody to die here this afternoon.
It's a bit melodramatic, isn't it?
Not buying it. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that would be Jarvis's go-to.
No, and it's It's definitely melodramatic, as you say. But I'm also thinking that she's not talking about not liking what she's doing as in leading Jarvis to steal, because I don't think she has any intention of doing that.
No, but
even at this point.
But Jarvis thinks so that part makes sense to me, because she wants Jarvis to believe that she's on board with it, but she wouldn't flip completely so easily. So it would make sense for her to be like, yeah, I don't really feel good about this, so just give me a little bit of space so I can make sure that he doesn't do it. I don't know. It just, I don't want anyone to die here seems a bit too much.
Yeah, it's the lines and the wording of it that I think even on first viewing, most fans probably realized that there was something up, because she doesn't talk like this.
No, not usually.
Yeah, so there's definitely some clue there that the situation is not what it appears to be.
No.
So Laura leaves Jarvis to go meet Steele, and we see that Jarvis has a team of officers scattered around in some somewhat decent disguises, except for the guy who looks like a bad Pee Wee Herman meets 80s new wave rocker. So we see Laura strolling through the grounds and Jarvis and the team monitoring her movements, at least for a bit. But then she turns a corner. And when Jarvis, following her, turns around that same corner, she's not there. And he begins calling his other team members, asking if anybody has a visual on her, because he's lost track of her. And at first, nobody seems to be able to see her. But then after a moment, one of the officers reports seeing her making for the stairs, as we see a figure in the distance, dressed in a large red hat and what looks like a matching graduation gown. Jarvis calls the troops, says she's running, and to close in to prevent her from getting away. Jarvis and his men come running from all directions, eventually catching up with not Laura. It's Mildred, dressed in the same hat and gown.
Did she dye her hair, though? Because her hair is dark brown here. And
I did not catch that.
Yeah, her hair is dark brown. It's Laura. It's
a wig?
Darker than Laura's even. And so it would have had to have been, because it's not, Mildred's hair is a much lighter color, right? So that was the only thing that I was kind of like, huh. And the fact that obviously, like, they saw her at a distance, they'd have to, because Laura and Mildred are two very different body types.
Yeah, but that's why the graduation gown, it's loose fitting, it hides the body
flowy,
type. So
it makes sense. But the hair was kind of what I was, it to me, it was very jarring to see Mildred with dark hair. So, but
then again, Jarvis and his team aren't that familiar with Laura, so
that's true.
They might not have caught that.
Yeah.
I didn't even catch that. But anyway, Jarvis gets there and he's not happy. And what's interesting is the line that's actually in the script. Mildred says, "Detective Jarvis, imagine meeting you here. Tell me, what's your favorite planet? Me, I've always been partial to Uranus."
Why didn't they not keep that?
I can only guess why they didn't keep that.
Oh, no, I love it. They should have kept that. That should have been. There is injustice has been done here today. You asked for the comedy, and there it was.
Yeah. Anyway, we see that Laura has hidden herself on the roof of one of the buildings. How did she get up there that fast without Jarvis seeing her climbing up?
I wondered that too. Yep.
It's going to take you at least several seconds to climb up a ladder.
One would think.
So, anyway, hand wave.
Yeah.
She climbs over the edge and hops down and pats on the wall where there's a little heart and initials and says, "You may not have been much of a kisser, Marty Klopman, but you sure know where to do it."
Well, I mean, there's the rebel, I guess. Her former boyfriend, Marty Klopman, graffitiing on a wall, I guess.
Yeah, see, and I wasn't sure what to make of that line, because was it because Marty Klopman knew all the hidden makeout spots and that's what enabled her to get away from Jarvis?
No, I think it was more her, like her commenting on the convenience of this spot where they, I guess, made out being one where she could trick. It's a bit
yeah, it's an obscure line. Anyway, next we see Laura's driving the Rabbit through town. She arrives at Steele's apartment, hops out, and begins to run to the front door, but Steele's voice stops her. and she follows the sound of his voice, only to fall through an uncovered storm drain.
You think he'd warn her
How
at
long
least.
has
Look down.
How long had Steele been standing there with the grate removed? And how many other people had fallen in that he had to throw back before she arrived?
There's another good scene that they should have kept. He catches some poor dude. Oh, you're not Laura. Sorry, off you go. That'd just be a very cartoonishly funny moment.
Yes, it would be. It's kind of like the, I was going to say, was it Looney Tunes or something like that? Anyway.
Yeah. There'd be like an Acme sign somewhere.
Anyway, so Laura makes a joke about having sent Jarvis to the store for wild goose, and then how Steele owes Marty Klopman a box of kisses for Christmas. And then Steele leads her through the tunnels to a phone junction box and demonstrates how he supposedly made and received phone calls that he never made and received. And he shows it using a phone repairman's handset clipping to the contacts of his phone line in a junction box. My question is this
is the point where I ask, is this actually possible?
Well,
sorry, we both asked something at the same time.
Well, my question was, why would it even be in this tunnel? Because isn't that a tunnel for the rain runoff? You know, that's what that grating is for. The water runs down in there.
That's also a very good question. Yeah, it wouldn't really be.
I wouldn't think you would want to put it in there. That would be so susceptible to corrosion and other problems. It just wouldn't make sense. But as far as, is that possible? I think it was back in the old days when we had landlines and they were connected with real wires. Yeah, somewhere they had all these junctions.
I had to explain to my daughter what a phone book was. Oh, no. The other day.
It's kind of like the internet or Google, but it's actually got good information.
But in a book.
Yeah, it's in a book and it's actual information. Yeah. I've called places using the phone numbers that Google has given, and it's like, no, not valid information. But yeah, so I think it was possible because that phone handset that he had was something that was used by phone repairmen. I don't know the exact details of how it connected in, but that seems about right from what I can recall. But I was never a telephone repairman, so who knows?
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, I think it's entirely feasible, at least that part of it. The box being down there in the rain gutters, no, not so much. Anyway, so when Steele shows this to Laura, she is a bit astonished and expresses a bit of admiration, saying, this guy's even better than I thought, maybe even brilliant. And
yeah,
when Steele,
she does seem to kind of admire his intelligence. It's almost as if there's like a professional respect between, or at least Laura has, for this person, this villain, this Dacoin, which they don't know that's who it is yet, but yeah, because she expresses sort of an admiration for how brilliant it is.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is you can admire somebody's brilliance without admiring their actions, their behaviors, their criminal intent.
Yeah.
The two are not mutually exclusive. It would be nice if they were, but they're not. So anyway, yeah. After Laura says this, Steele says he doesn't know who could be doing this, who could be behind it. And Laura is really pretty harsh with him. At least that's how it comes across to me. She says, well, think about it.
She is.
Almost as if she's accusing him of either not trying hard enough or just not really even trying.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's...
Yeah, I get the impression that she's kind of desperate right here. And because in her mind, his past is the only thing that could potentially be responsible for it, she's... I think maybe in some part of her thinks that he isn't trying hard enough.
Yeah, that's how it really comes across to me. definitely. And of course, Steele's had it as well. I mean, he snaps back at her saying, what does she think he's been doing? He's gone back over everything, every barroom brawl, every jealous lover. There's no one he knows, as he puts it, with enough savvy to grind an axe this sharp.
What's interesting about it is that it makes sense. What Steele does for a living is not necessarily like he's fleecing usually we know that he's stealing things for finder's fees, or I mean, obviously they had to set up that elaborate sting with Hoskins, so I don't think it's entirely like, but that was Daniel's enemy. That wasn't his. Right. So I think it makes sense because the people he's run afoul of are not criminal masterminds. They're people that he has conned. And so in essence, he'd be smarter than them on some level, or at least to an extent. And yeah, I believe that it would be that Laura's not really thinking clearly enough to realize what he's telling her is that I haven't really done anything that warrants this sort of maliciousness. This in-depth, thought-out, it's Count of Monte Cristo-esque, if you've ever read the book or seen the movie.
I saw the Murder, She Wrote episode. A guy that
spends, however many years in... Yeah, okay, there you go. Like spending all that time in prison to plot your revenge against someone, it's pretty intense. So, but on the he sees that his world is crumbling. He's the life he's started to build is disappearing, and it's actually rather telling that he wasn't sure that Laura would even come to him. And I think that this whole scene is just really interesting between them, the way that it plays out.
Yeah. Well, we know that he's crossed some people in the past who would not hesitate to stoop to setting him up for something, but they were more the bash him and smash him type, not the finesse type.
Oh, yeah. Like Hoskins was not that bright in terms of what he was like. Hoskins, again, was Daniel's enemy, but if these are the kind of people he was conning, they're more likely to just shoot you.
Yeah, I was thinking, I can't think of their names right now off the top of my head, the guys from the premiere episode.
Oh, yeah, Kessler and Neef.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, he's definitely made enemies.
They do their best work with knives.
Yeah, but not axes yeah, not axes this sharp. Anyway, so Laura is adamant that nobody sets up a scheme this clever without leaving a calling card. There's got to be something strange that they've come across that might ring a bell. An ice cream truck in the middle of nowhere, an old man with a handful of lilies, an old coin in a box. And Steele, you're not listening. You're not listening. You didn't hear me, did you?
Neither one of them is.
Well, yeah. And she definitely isn't. I think he is, but it's not that he's not listening. It's just that he's not expressing well, that he's rejecting what she's saying as being inaccurate. Not rejecting her, but just saying, no, I know what you're saying. I understand it, but it's wrong. And she's not hearing that. So anyway, Laura again has had it. And she says, yes, I did hear you, but I've put everything I worked for on the line to come back here. The least you can do is try once more. Translation, you're still not thinking hard enough, because if you were, you would have connected the dots by now. Is kind of how that is. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because, again, we talked about how logically she's right to assume it's somebody from his past. Logically. Right. Given his profession, if you want to call it that. And the fact that they have run afoul of people that he has been in. I mean, you've had Felicia. We've had Daniel show up. We've had the Mexico episode. There's been times where his past has returned to kind of bite them in the butt a little bit. So, but she's so stuck on this one. Yeah. And she's so stuck on it that she's not actually thinking that she's not listening to him, as you said. He's telling her, listen, I get it. I see what you're saying, but I just can't think of anybody that would want to do this.
Yeah. So at this point, Steele says, what is probably the most rational and yet the most hurtful thing he could have possibly said. And that's, maybe it's time I cut you free of this. At least that way he couldn't pull you down with me. And what he's saying is he's concerned about her, and he's willing to make himself the lone target and metaphorically take the bullet for her. But of course, all she hears is the sound of her father leaving, the sound of Wilson leaving, the sound of every man she's ever known leaving. Murphy, yeah.
Bernice. I mean, even, and if you watch Stephanie Zimbalist's body language, she goes rigid when he says this, because as you said, this is her greatest fear come to life. He's trying to protect her and trying to protect her business, but he knows what the agency means to her. He doesn't want to be responsible for destroying it. And I don't think he's used to having someone depend on him or have this much responsibility over somebody else's life. Mm-hmm. But of course, like you said, she sees his offer as just an attempt to leave when things get tough.
Yeah. Because again, she's not listening to what he's trying to say. She's just hearing the words. But
what he's trying to do for her.
Yeah.
Right? He's going, look, I get what you're telling me. Somebody is trying to get me, whoever it is. I don't have these answers. So if I leave, at least then I protect you.
Yeah. I'll fall on my sword for you.
Yeah. Which is really sweet. But
in kind of
it does not go, it goes over like a
lead balloon.
Yeah, it goes over like a screen door in a submarine, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not
so
she's not a fan.
Anyway, Laura's response is that it's out of the question. And again, based on everything we just said, her response is tinged with anger and disgust that he would even think about leaving her at this point and abandoning her. And I put that in sarcasm quotes because that's her perception. But anyway, Steele is resigned to leaving at this point and says they have no more idea of who they're up against than the general on that coin, and that he doesn't want to be remembered as the man who tore her life to little pieces. And Laura, again, just really bites his head off. Just drop it. Besides, it's a major, not a general.
It's interesting, too. This just occurred to me that if we think back to Thou Shalt Not Steal, Felicia shows up. She's threatening the agency, or at least this 5 Nudes of Cairo case could blow up in their face. And Laura she goes and she says, I'm not sure this arrangement is in our best interest anymore. And his response was, we're at that point, are we? And she says, yeah, I think we are. And at that point, she was at least thinking clearly enough to recognize that if he becomes a liability, he has to go.
Right.
And now she's so emotionally invested that when he is actually trying to do what he believes is the right thing, and what could theoretically be the right thing if they don't solve the case, she's not thinking about what's good for the agency or anything but what would be the worst case scenario for her emotionally.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting that she's done that 360 since it's been a year since he first showed up.
Yeah. Yeah. But when she makes that comment about the character on the coin being a major, not a general, suddenly every criticism that she had leveled at Remington comes home to roost. Nobody sets up a scheme this clever without leaving a calling card. There's got to be something strange that we've come across that might ring a bell. An ice cream truck in the middle of nowhere, an old man with a handful of lilies, a coin in a box. So it's all starting to suddenly make sense to her in her mind. But as she's thinking this, trying to put the clues together, Steele slips out quietly.
He sneaks away.
Yeah. So when she does finally get everything put together, he's not there to hear her say that, I know who it is. He's not after your Remington, Steele. He's after mine. So
I love this twist. I love it. Whatever the criticisms we have about Dacoin as a character, I love the fact that it's her past that is coming back to haunt them and not his.
Yeah. Yeah. It is
because it's such a cool thing we never saw coming, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because the whole episode up to this point was, what has he done? Who has he crossed? Who has he made mad? Who's out for revenge for him as the person before he was Remington Steele? So, yeah.
Yep. Which I wish they had done more with. We had gotten more cases connected back to before he was Remington Steele. Maybe not necessarily with this particular twist, but it would have been cool to at least connect back, have maybe a client returns for help again or something like that. And they're like, oh, wait, he does exist. Huh.
Yeah. Anyway, next we see Steele emerge from the underground tunnels only to be immediately spotted by Pee Wee Herman. And Steele takes off running, hops a fence, and then having temporarily slipped away from him, begins walking as casually as possible along the sidewalk, thumb out in the classic hitchhiker position. And as Jarvis's men approach...
Yeah, super casual.
Yeah.
Like the most expensive suit.
Yeah. But as Jarvis's men approach, a somewhat beat-up old truck pulls up alongside, stops, and Steele jumps in. But we see that the truck is being driven really by our mystery man. He's got a slight disguise on, but it's not much. But since Steele had never seen him up to this point...
doesn't need the disguise at this point. It's a pair of sideburns. He just likes costumes. That guy's Mr. Dress Up.
Yes, he likes the theater of it. He goes for the theatrical versions.
For the Americans listening, Mr. Dress Up was a children's cartoon in Canada, circa like 1960 something, all the way through to the 80s, and it was a man named Mr. Dress Up who had and I know how this is going to sound, but he had a tickle trunk full of costumes that he would take out and put on. And it was very cool. And nobody better mock it because it was really cool. Anyway, he's Mr. Dress Up.
Yep. So that's what he is. Yep. Well, next we see the truck still occupied by Steele and our mystery man. They're out of the city. They're now in the hills. And Steele tells the driver that he can drop him off at the next truck stop just up ahead. And the man asks with something of a Texas-Oklahoma drawl, "Are you sure, Mr. Steele?"
Yeah. It's really bad.
Yeah. Remington tries to suggest that, the driver has him confused with somebody else, but the man is insistent. He's Remington Steele. Done a lot of reading up on you, and says he's had a lot of time for reading, and calls him Remington Steele, king of the private detectives.
It's never a good thing that you want to hear somebody say, well, I did a lot of reading. I had a lot of time. That means one of two things.
Mm-hmm.
It means prison or librarian.
Well, it could also mean mental
prison librarian, maybe.
Institution.
True.
Could,
actually, that's
could
true.
Also,
yes.
yeah. But yeah, not a good sign. But anyway, Steele again tries to play down the king of private detectives line, saying that that's an exaggeration. You know how the media can be. And Driver says, well, yeah, he does, because he can remember the fuss that the media made when Steele solved the Lily Martin case. Of course, Steele has no idea who Lily Martin is, so he just cautiously agrees that, yes, it was one of his more difficult cases, which is never a good response. It's always just better just to play dumb or be quiet or whatever. But anyway, he falls for it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And then we learned about Lily Martin when the driver says that she had been stealing from Palmer Bank and that after being caught, she killed herself. And Steele rather insincerely agrees that, yes, it was tragic, quite tragic.
Yeah.
Then we see Mildred. She's returned to the office just in time to answer a phone call from Laura, who is calling from a payphone on a corner somewhere. During their conversation, we learn about Percy Descoigne, former major in the Air Force, released from Soledad Prison 6 months earlier on parole after having served 3 years of an 8-year term for a bank embezzlement scheme. And Spellman appears to have never existed. No birth certificate, no tax returns. And Mildred says that after some arm twisting, she managed to get the chief coroner to admit that, yes, there was a body stolen from the local morgue earlier in the week. But she has no idea where a body would have been kept hidden for a week. And Laura immediately has an answer. An ice cream truck.
Poor Mildred.
Yes.
She still doesn't know what's going on.
No, she doesn't.
She's probably pieced together a bit of it, but...
Yeah. I mean, and she's probably pieced some of it together correctly and some of it together incorrectly. But
yeah.
Laura commends Mildred for her work by promising that they're going to give her a raise for all of this. And Mildred's response is, forget the raise. Just tell me what's going on. And Laura assures her that they will soon.
Later.
Yes. Then we hear Laura thanking Jarvis for his comment, in absentia, thanking him, about how people seem to always come back to the same place sooner or later. Now we're back in the truck, Steele commenting that with so many cases, it's hard to recall the details of any one particular case, which doesn't set too well with our mystery driver, Descoing. He pulls up a shotgun, points it at Remington, and says, without the trace of the drawl, yes, but this time you're going to remember. He's also disappointed that a man of Steele's reputation would not recall sending him to prison.
Wouldn't a smaller, and I'm going to ask again because you know more about this stuff than I do, but wouldn't a smaller gun be easier for the purpose of driving and holding him hostage? It looked really awkward.
Yeah, it would be easier to hold, but it's also easier to miss, even at that close of a distance. If your aim is just a little bit off because you're trying to hold the steering wheel with one hand and look at the road ahead and kind of casually look out the side of your eye to see somebody, your aim could be off. Whereas with the shotgun, especially given that this is a sawed-off shotgun, the pellet from inside of there is going to spread wider and cause damage over a wider area. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So this is why I ask you these questions.
So anyway, as he removes his hand from the shotgun to reach up and take off his hat, Steele makes a grab for the gun, but it doesn't work. The man grabs the gun, shoves it in Steele's ribs, and says, boom. And as he pulls off his fake sideburns, he continues saying that he planted the clues of his revenge so carefully. But regardless, if Steele remembers or not, they've reached the end of the game. Or at least they've reached the end game of the game. Or they've reached the beginning of the end of the game. Because it's still not over.
Not to be confused with Avengers Endgame.
Steele is surprised that the mystery man is just going to shoot him with a shotgun after all the trouble he's gone to. And the man says, no, that's only the last resort. He's going to give Steele a chance to find the evidence that will clear him of Spellman's murder. He says it's just to make things interesting, but it's really just the last twist of the proverbial knife so he can see Steele twist and turn inside like Lily did, his beloved Lily. He suggests that perhaps Steele may find himself making the same choice that Lily did. And then he finally issues the last challenge. Steele will have 30 minutes to reach their final destination. He states that a man in perfect physical condition, running at top speed, should be able to reach it in 22, which leaves 8 minutes for the game. Steele asks where he's supposed to go.
Can I point something out?
Yes, go ahead.
When he says this, there is 8 minutes left in the episode.
I did not time that.
Which I thought was cool.
Yes. I
made sure I looked.
TV shows do things like this where they have a, like a timer and such. And I do like it when they do something so that it does time out exactly the way it's supposed to on the screen and in real life. So yeah, that's if that's the case, and I fully believe you, that I like that. That's a nice, cool touch. So anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Steele asks where he's supposed to go, but the mystery man tells him no more questions. Stopping the truck, he orders Steele out and says, it's time for Steele to run. Once Steele is out of the truck, the mystery man aims the shotgun at him and says, he really can't be trusted. And he pulls the triggers. Well, first one and then the other. And he says, just a little something to get the adrenaline pumping. He throws the shotgun out of the truck and drives off, and Steele begins running after. Now here, we've done this before where
he's a good runner.
Yeah. We've done it before where we bring out pieces of the script direction and talked about it.
Yep.
And I don't think we've ever actually said outright that some of the writing, some of the best writing in these scripts is actually in the stage direction, the things that people never see. And this is one, because we see Steele running, and what the script reads is almost like a desperate, exhausted animal, now squeezing out that final drop of effort as he clutches the pain in his side. His shirt is soaked and open, his hair is drenched and wild, his shoes and pants covered with dust as we sense he cannot maintain the pace much longer. when a car horn begins blasting frantically behind him. Remington doesn't stop running, but cocks an eye to see Laura's car coming up next to him and pulling ahead slightly, stopping as Laura hops out to grab onto a body that's forgotten it knows how to stop, throwing her arms around him and pulling his breathless face into a powerful kiss. Laura then permits him some air. Some of the best writing in some of these scripts you never see. And I think that's an example of it.
Yeah, that's impressive.
You know, the body that has forgotten it and knows how to stop. I mean,
that's wow. Like that's really good.
It is. This guy could write fan fiction.
I'm just thinking that. He's really good. I'd read that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, so Laura's been in a panic. She found the shotgun on the road and she was just envisioning the worst. Steele gratefully and ungratefully says, couldn't you treat me like this at times when I'm less near death? Laura explains and provides the final details of the puzzle. It wasn't someone from your past. It was from mine. When Remington Steele was just a name on an office. I solved the case, but naturally Descoing thought you were behind it all. And while Steele says he's sure it'll all make sense to him later, all he knows is that he has 10 minutes to get somewhere down the road, and he just doesn't know where. Laura has the answer, the acid bath. I have questions about the acid bath. I mean, I tried to look up what an acid bath would be in an industrial size like this. I couldn't find it. I found references to acid baths for like etching pieces of metal, but nothing on this scale. So I don't know. What did you find?
I found nothing. I couldn't. Well, mainly because I thought it was acid vats, not baths. Oh. So I was Googling the wrong thing. But also, yeah, this is James Bondian. We've talked about how they've basically been using this season as a big James Bond audition. Right. This is the kind of thing a Bond villain would do. Yes. Ha! Here's the evidence. I'm putting it in the acid. You have to get it, Mr. Bond. Yeah, it's great.
Don't these criminals ever learn? Never give the good guy a chance. Just blow
Do you
away.
wish me to talk Goldfinger?
Anyway.
Right? Actually, if you've seen Austin Powers, there's that really funny bit with the, no, I'm just going to place them in an overly elaborate, easily escapable trap and assume it all went to plan. What?
I haven't seen it. I've got those on my...
Scott's like, I've got a gun. We can shoot him now.
I've got those on my Apple TV, but I haven't watched them yet. I'll have to do that. So
they're pretty fun. I mean, they're pretty 90s, but they're also pretty funny.
Anyway, Laura adds that Lily Martin was a teller at Palmer Bank and Descoing's accomplice in the embezzlement scheme. And when she found out that Laura and Murphy were onto her, she killed herself at the acid baths. So we get one last obtuse, but hurrah for Murphy. So Laura and Steele drive to the acid bath where Descoing is... Laura and Steele drive to the acid bath where Descoing is waiting on the overhead walkway holding a small cooler. And he's a bit put out about Steele cheating. After all, the game was Steele was supposed to run the entire way. But no matter, it won't really change the outcome, he thinks. Laura hollers up at him that they know that he staged the accident by stealing a corpse, then keeping the body cool before he pushed it in front of the car. Descoing says none of that matters because if they can't prove it, it didn't happen. And so to prove it, they're going to need what's in the ice cream truck itself, along with the evidence that he's left inside. So Descoing opens the cooler, pulls out a block of ice hanging from a loop of rope, and inside of the block of ice is a key to the garage where he has hidden the truck. And I do see a tab on there that is hanging, so hopefully that's got the address, because if not, I'm not sure how they would find it. But anyway, he tells them that they would need to retrieve the block of ice from the acid before it dissolves, along with their chance to prove Steele's innocence. Then he tosses the block of ice into the vat. Laura and Steele begin... Yeah.
Sorry, I figured that it belonged there, so...
Laura,
someone had to.
Yeah. Laura and Steele begin climbing the ladders to the structure, with Steele trying to...
I'm done.
With Steele trying to catch this coin and Laura surveying the vat to determine how to retrieve the block of ice and the key it contains. She climbs back down, runs to the rabbit, grabs the shotgun, which she conveniently picked up and brought with her. Climbing back to the vat, she leans out over the top, which is open, and tries in various ways to snag the block with the shotgun. Meanwhile, Steele has followed this coin up onto a mound of dirt, but Descoin isn't on the other side as expected. Instead, he's in an ultralight that flies up and past Steele's head. Steele runs back towards the vat as Laura continues to fail in her efforts to retrieve the frozen key. And then, standing over the vat, the two of them begin quarreling over what to do. The only suggestion Steele can come up with, all his ideas are non-starters. They won't work any better, or maybe not even as well as what Laura's been trying. But there's a long run of wire, and Laura grabs it, begins to wind it around the barrel of the shotgun. She says they need electrical power. And Steele had better come up with an idea quick about where to get it, because this is their last shot. Steele suggests the car battery. He climbs down, grabs the other end of the wires, and as Laura is trying to hasten his efforts, she's giving him a progress report saying, "Come on, there's not much time. The ice is almost gone." Steele gets the ends of the wires stripped of insulation and then connects them to the car battery, but it's still not enough. The magnetic pull of the improvised electromagnet isn't strong enough to bridge the gap. Steele, back on the walkway, grabs Laura's waistband at the back of her pants to secure her while she is able to lean even farther out over the vat than she could on her own. The magnet begins doing its job, but the bubbling action of the vat is fighting that attraction. But slowly, the remainder of the ice and the key are drawn closer and closer to the shotgun magnet until finally, much to their relief, the key, now totally free to the ice, jumps to the end of the magnetized barrel.
This is both a really cool science lesson for anybody watching, as well as a really interesting trust exercise, because that would take an immense amount of trust on Laura's part to obviously believe that he's not going to drop her, because you're literally like hanging over boiling acid. So I think that kind of really symbolizes a lot for this episode, because earlier in the episode, he's threatening to leave, and she's terrified that every fear that she's had about him is coming true. And now she's trusting him literally with her life in one of the most vulnerable positions that you could possibly be in. So kind of neat.
I'm not sure she thinks that he might drop her intentionally, although certainly by accident. I'm thinking that there's really a lot of trust in the clothing manufacturers than anything else.
Yeah, true.
Because you never know.
I'd write them a letter after this. Like, here's what your clothing stood up to.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, Jarvis arrives at the office, key in hand, and he hands the key to Steele and says, "I thought you might like to have this as a souvenir of sorts." And Steele, with some gratitude, says, "Well, it's not exactly an autographed picture of Tommy Lasorda, but under the circumstances, yeah, it'll do." Laura asks about this coin. Jarvis says he doesn't have any encouraging news, saying that a small plane like that can land almost any place. Yes, they're still looking, but the best he can offer is a sincere apology. And after Steele graciously accepts the apology, Mildred asks if somebody is finally going to tell her what's going on.
Oh, poor Mildred.
Yeah. Laura lets Jarvis fill her in, and
which is cute.
They actually their attitude changes a little bit here, because earlier, obviously, that had been confrontational because Jarvis was trying to nail Steele on this thing, but now seems to have actually, if not forgiven him, at least given him some grace, let's say.
Yeah.
So Jarvis and Mildred move away from the desk, leaving Steele and Laura together. Steele steps over to Laura and hands her the key, saying it really belongs to her. And she jokingly asks if this is the key to his innocence locked in her heart. And he says, No, think of it as an anniversary present. And she seems to agree on one condition, that he promised to never leave her for her own good. He agrees to the promise and then leans forward to kiss her, but he's interrupted by the sound of the computer being connected to by another computer. Then a message appears on the screen. Steele, my congratulations. Until next time, Major Descoyne. Steele frowns at the computer and says, I've never liked that machine.
It's a good tag. I like it.
Yeah. So that's the end of the episode. Any further thoughts or comments? Yes. Technical issues. Oh, we seem to be beset with them lately.
We've had, this was a challenge, this one. For those of you listening, this episode was beset with technical difficulties. So it was
a multitude of technical difficulties. Yeah. In fact, in some ways it at least matches what we had with, that one.
That one. Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. Sting of Steel. Was it Sting of Steel?
Yes, Sting, yes.
Sting of Steel.
Yeah. So if this turns out halfway decent, it's it'll be a miracle.
It's because of you, let's face it, because I still have not figured out the editing part of this. So if it turns out halfway decent, your full credit goes to you.
Anyway.
Final thoughts. I like the episode. I like the B plot. Mm-hmm. Not sure the A plot works all the time, but I don't mind a criminal mastermind. This is more like a criminal mastermind who really likes his costumes. So I don't know, maybe theater would have been a better vocation for him, but either way,
sure.
it was fun. I almost think for me it comes down to the actor. I think maybe Descoyne would have worked a little better had he been played by someone different. And that's not to say that actor is not a good actor. I just don't know that if this was the right part, or
he wasn't the right actor for the role.
Yeah, I don't know. I could be wrong, and other people might love him in it, but he's, in my opinion, not the best guest actor character we've had so far.
Yeah. I think overall, like I said at the beginning, it's a good episode. I agree it could have been improved had the actor playing Descoyne been a little bit better suited for the part. But again, I would only give it so much grace because I still don't like the supervillain genre. It's too DC Comics for me. But anyway, still, a decent episode. And overall, still well done. So,
yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, if that's it, we'll mention the website, www.SteeleWatching.com. And there you'll find the show notes, links to we didn't really have a movie. So.
Well, we kind of had a vague reference to Rebel Without a Cause with Laura.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and put a link into that, even though it wasn't really I was going to say it wasn't even really a direct reference, but it wasn't even really an indirect reference. It was just kind of
well, she did say Jimmy Dean made it safe for all us rebels. So
yeah. So anyway, so we'll have a link to that. And then we will also have links to a few other things, such as
the Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as the Facebook group, which is unofficially where the podcast meets, or podcast and everybody else meets. It's kind of like our group. Yes. Come and join us. Wow, I'm really articulate right now. I'm doing a great job.
So
I had hardly any sleep last night. This is what happened.
Yeah, well, this hasn't been a great day for me either. So anyway, next, a steal at any price. And that's going to be yours. Pitkins, yes.
Yeah.
Pitkins.
I'll have my Pitkin. Will you have your Pitkin?
Oh, yes. A little bit too bizarre for my taste. But anyway, we will have that next. So if that's it, I think we'll all say goodbye.
I think that's it. Bye-bye.